What's the weirdest thing you've seen someone do to save a buck? I was working in a restaurant in Montreal and the staff decided to all have a picnic and a few beers together. We all pitched in to get steaks, salads, and drinks. I invited a friend that didn't work with us and he showed up with a potato. Yep, one potato. He drank the beer, ate salad and steak. Oh, and he ate his potato too. Ugh. My brother had an old Fiat 127. The gas style hadn't worked for a while, so sometimes he'd run out of gas. One time he was with my young nephew when it happened again. They pushed it for like half a mile. Arriving at the gas station, he realized it was rather more expensive than another gas station further up the road, so they pushed it for another half mile. I mean, if he was really smart, he'd just push the car everywhere and never have to pay for gas. My mate lays out a certain number of sheets of toilet roll if you ask to use his loo. My grandmother, as she didn't own a computer, had to mail in all of her bill payments. One month, she didn't get her hot water bill, or it was delivered to someone else by accident. Whatever the cause, her next bill was for both that month and the previous month, and included a late fee that was less than the cost of a stamp. For the rest of her life, she skipped the bill one month and then paid both the next because she saved a few cents by just using one stamp instead of two. This was a woman who had somewhere around a few $1 million in the bank when she died. I went for a meal with a group of about 6 friends. When it came time to divvy up the bill, one friend said he hadn't got cash on him, but if we all chipped in the cash for our share, he'd put it on his card. He was also very keen to ensure we all put in a decent tip. It was in the UK, so tipping is common in a restaurant but not required. Our friend went up to the bar to pay, but unfortunately for him, another member of our party went to the restroom at the same time and was surprised to notice him paying in cash. We pulled him up on this, and it turned out the stingy bastard was using our tips to cover his part of the meal. This chap has forevermore been ribbed as having short arms and deep pockets. He's trusted by no one. And rightfully mistrusted. That's an impressive level of debaggery. I hope that he was a truly entertaining guy to have around, because I'd actually be pretty annoyed about someone else trying to use me as their restaurant meal financer. My dad once took a broken fork to the aerospace company he worked for and had a highly skilled welder weld it back together. This was a cheap, crap dinner fork. I was at a friend's apartment about 5 years ago for a moving-in get-together for about 10 other people. Halfway through the party, I used the bathroom, and when I went to wash my hands, I noticed he had not got around to buying hand towels yet. Giving him some slack and understanding it was his first place, I figured I'd just grab a few squares of toilet paper and simply dab my hands with that. That's not a big deal, but the roll of toilet paper was empty, so I just dried my hands on my pants and let my friend know he needed to replace the roll. After I told him, this motherfricker walked into the bathroom, grabbed what he thought were the cleanest squares of used toilet paper from the trash can, and wrapped them around the empty roll. I don't know what the heck those squares were used for or what possessed him to do something so unsanitary and absurd, but I didn't end up staying at the party much longer to ask him why. It was very easily the cheapest, stingiest, and most disgusting thing I've witnessed in my life. I wasn't really very close to the guy who threw the party, and that basically confirmed that I wouldn't be making any attempts to further the friendship. My mum's cousin would invite us over for a barbecue and go around to each person and ask if they wanted a hamburger or a hot dog. I got the stink eye once for asking to have one of each. When it got dark out, her husband would want to do a fireworks show and asked everyone to chip in money for it. They were cheap fireworks too, or to be more accurate, some sparks danced around on the ground for a few seconds. One of their dogs was a massive jerk when it came to food. We had dessert pastries, and right as I was bringing my eclair to my mouth, this monster of a dog jumped up onto me and snatched it right out of my hands. Because of the whole one-per-person ration, I had no dessert that day. Another time, the dog attempted to eat their younger daughter's hot dog. He didn't actually get it, but several of us had witnessed that the hot dog had been licked. My cousin and her husband said that their daughter could still eat it. She was only 3 years old and she wouldn't know the difference anyway. My uncle eventually stepped up, taking the hot dog and throwing it in the trash can, leaving them the options of making one more hot dog because we all knew there were more in the freezer, or letting their daughter starve because they were too cheap to make extra food. I think they've been less stingy since that incident, but none of us go to their barbecues anymore. I used to work as a waiter for the country club. I had a woman tell me she was done with her plate, so I cleared it off the table. When I returned to ask if they wanted dessert, she asks, "Where are my leftovers?" I calmly responded that she had no food left on her plate. Her response was, "Oh, I wanted you to box up the skin from my baked potato so I could give it to my dog." She requested to see the manager, $80 bill completely free of charge. To this day, I swear she had it planned the whole time. A school friend's dad made her bread sandwiches because he didn't want to, quote, waste money on pointless fillings when the bread would swell your stomach with water. Oh, and that sandwich fillings were part of a capitalist machine that rules us all. In college, I lived with 4 other guys and they refused to buy toilet paper. It was disgusting. They'd just crap and then hop in the shower to wash off, but never had toilet paper. Oftentimes, if they really needed to go number 2 but didn't want to go through the trouble of showering afterwards, they'd get someone else to go and get napkins from the McDonald's that was super close to us. I had my own darn toilet paper and I wasn't letting them use it up just to never replace it. I did this several times. But then one of my roommates, I guess, was like, "Frick it, I'll take one for the team." He worked at a gym, so he took a massive roll of toilet paper that goes to their public restrooms. I mean like a 16-inch diameter but 2.5-inch wide wheel of toilet paper. Cheap mother frickers, but I guess that's college. When I was a teen, a guy who I respected a lot paid me to rake his yard. After we were done, he drove me home and on the way he stopped at a local country store to buy a soda and snack. I didn't expect him to pay for me because I had my own money now that I'd just earned raking his yard, so I put my merch on the checkout counter and then he slid his stuff beside mine like he's going to pay, except he didn't. The clerk looked to me since I had money to pay for it and he looks at me too as if to say, "Well, pay her." I was confused but paid for it. He apologized later and I lost respect for him. My flatmate stole toilet paper from his office when it was his turn to buy. Only he stole 1 roll and thought that was the equivalent of the 16-pack the rest of us bought. Seriously, you don't have to buy that often and it's like $2 to $3 for a 16-pack. Maybe he's embarrassed to buy toilet paper. Imagine the look on the cashier's face when he or she sees that you wipe your butt like an animal. I'm with your roomie on this one. I think all of us have had a flatmate this stingy in university. I think how hard we really judge him lies on whether he's older than his mid-20s. You should have had that behavior bullied right out of you by that point. Went out to dinner, the check came in. Let's say it was a total of $40 for 4 people. 3 of us put in $12 each for our parts and tips. The 4th person looked at the cash we put down, counted it, and put in $4. My friend's dad would abuse Walmart's return policy. He'd do things like get a gallon of milk, drink most of it, fill it back up with water, and take it back to exchange it. I've heard people admit they'll go to Costco for lunch and just walk around to every sample table, getting little free bites until they're full. Which is weird considering Costco sells actual lunch food at their food court for like $2, and they're giant portions too. A family friend of mine once told his parents that he was sharing his school lunches with a classmate, and that he was worried about this classmate's financial situation. His parents were concerned too. They met with the principal. Eventually, they asked their child which classmate specifically was in possible financial trouble. He named a kid from one of the wealthiest families in the country, billionaires. "We think he'll probably be okay." I'm sure there's much worse than this, but my boss is a millionaire. He owns a lot of companies, is well known in his industry, and is generally a baller. He splurges on us if we've done well, always picks up the tab if we're out, doesn't put a spending cap on things like Christmas parties. But one time I had to fly from the UK to America. To save money, I had to get 4 flights instead of 1 direct one. My journey took 24 hours instead of 11, and I had to do 3 days' work in the US literally 7 hours after I landed, jet lag and all. As if that wasn't annoying enough, the flight was booked to take off at 9 a.m. That meant getting to the airport at 6 a.m. I don't live anywhere near an airport and had to travel south to London, then get across London and then travel south for another hour to the airport. The whole journey could have been done in 3 hours at a push. Due to the time of day, public transport was limited. There was 1 train I could get that would have allowed me to make it. Considering there would have been 6 stages to my journey, I didn't want to risk any delays that would mean me missing my flight. An old neighbor of mine was a taxi driver. I called him up, got mates rates on the journey, the taxi costing a whole £10 more than my public transport journey would have done, but taking less than a third of the time. And he threw something of a fit in front of the entire office about this, about how it was lazy, about how there were ways I could do it on public transport that would be cheaper. He didn't understand that not living in London means I'm limited to one train per hour and there's no 24-hour buses. If the train doesn't show up or is late, that's it. After a while, he calmed down and said it was fine to get the taxi if I didn't take any luggage. He wanted me to travel with just hand luggage. It wouldn't have been the end of the world if I didn't have to carry about 50 brochures, a ton of contracts, and loads of other crap which filled half a normal suitcase. He also said I could just wear my suit on the plane, the same suit I was going to wear for the next 3 days to save space. I was traveling for over 24 hours each way and going to the West Coast in peak summertime where temperatures were 45 degrees Celsius during the day. It was so weird to see such a generous man being so uptight about what was only about £50 worth of extra costs to make the experience remotely bearable. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friend sat in his car for 3 hours on a Saturday night rather than pay a $5 cover charge. Well, my roommate, despite often bragging about how much money he's saved up and buying green herb every other day, so he's clearly got plenty to spend, uses my significant others and my toothpaste, picks up my used razors out of the trash can and uses them on himself. When it's his turn to buy toilet paper, he buys a 4-pack of the smallest, crappiest quality TPE he can find. I'm pretty sure he'd buy 1 roll at a time if he could. He uses my shampoo and tries to hide it by putting water in it back up to full. When my significant other began his brewing hobby, my roommate was all for helping out in exchange for beer until he realized he was expected to chip in and help with the process. That partnership ended really quickly. He broke the toaster trying to cook hash browns in it, and I don't mean the oval-shaped ones. He tried to buy one at a crappy thrift shop and complained he had to buy a brand new one at a full price. A whopping $30. A real winner, that guy. In this video today, we're uncovering a somewhat well-known phenomenon that those who are financially well off are as often as not massive cheapskates. And half the time, it's people who are born into money, not just the ones who've accrued their wealth by scrimping and saving their whole lives. Maybe certain people just have a cheap gene that affects the rich and poor alike. I met with 3 buddies at a very nice bar and restaurant. Let's call them Bob, John, and Travis. John's been going to this place for years, and the owner is an extremely close friend of his. Because of this, we got comped drinks all night. I'm not just talking beers, but scotch, vodka, other things. Maybe about $100 worth of free booze between us. Great times, right? No. Why? Because Bob is a cheap, bloody, smelly little C-word. So we're drinking our butts off free of charge, and we're also ordering food to make up for it. Pasta, chicken, fish, the works. But Bob isn't happy because Bob doesn't want to pay for anything. So what does Bob do? He asks for the special appetizer for $10, but asks the owner to make it dinner-sized. The owner responds, "Do you mean that you want the dinner instead of the appetizer? Duh." Alright, so we pig the frick out. We drink our butts off, Bob's wasted. We wait and wait and wait for Bob to eat a table-sized platter all by himself. Frick you, Bob. And then we get the bill. As I've noted, it's about $100 less than it should have been, and we are all thrilled. Well, we're all thrilled except for Bob, because Bob's meal is $19 instead of $10. As John reminds him that he drank his own weight in free liquor and begs him not to make a scene, Bob proceeds to go up to the owner behind the bar and throw a fricking fit about the $9 he should have saved on his special dinner-sized appetizer. The owner is stunned, John is furious, Travis hates confrontation, so Travis slinks out the door, and I'm just a wallflower. Bob slams his fist on the counter, Bob points at the chalkboard, Bob whines and whines and whines that he doesn't have the money to pay for the extra $9, though he works a really frickin' cushy job and eats out 3 times a day. He calls the owner names, he cries, he actually cries. Then he sits his bloated butt down, pitches in $10 and refuses to tip. and he smiles. The C word is fricking smiling, and that set John off. John flips his crap, calls Bob every name in the book, and makes a go at me for trying to cover Bob just to get us the heck out of this place. He gets up on his chair. He throws handfuls of money in Bob's face like the guy is some fat, hairy Russian exotic dancer. Women are stunned, the owner is laughing, Travis is looking in the window, and I'm stuck with Bob as John finally pays the bill, tips his friend $100, and stomps outside, sending Travis flailing down the street. Bob looks at me, I look back at him, and his only reaction, "What a Jew, am I right?" I leave Bob at the table alone. We don't eat with Bob anymore. Let me walk you through all the fascinating financial specimens that are my family. 1. My great-grandmother apparently took a Ziploc to buffets and after eating would go back one last time, pile food on her plate, and then store it in the bag. She grew up during the Great Depression, though. I grew up with a really thrifty family, so I have more. We ended up going to a lot of events for free because my dad was super stingy, but he wanted our family to have fun even if we didn't have a lot of money to spend on entertainment. So 2. My dad randomly became friends with a woman we met at the movies. She had handfuls of free tickets to movies before they were widely released, just so the movie critics could watch a show with a full audience. We ended up seeing hundreds of movies for free, even though we had to get there early for good seats. These were the best types of showings too, because they held promotions and gave out free posters, t-shirts, and knickknacks. Saw a lot of good movies and some really bad ones. I still know we have a Pan's Labyrinth poster up in the attic somewhere. I think we have a shirt from The Dark Knight too. 3. Speaking about free events, my dad signed up for some Disney theme parks roster whenever they would film something at Disney World and needed extras. I think he knew about this from chatting with some random strangers who worked for Disney and befriending them as well. We'd go to film shoots and each person got a one-day ticket to any Disney theme park. This was the only way we could afford Disney for 4 people without a year-long pass. Unfortunately, Disney isn't as fun without money because you miss out on a lot of the food and souvenirs, but other than that, it was nice to attend for free. Speaking of food, we'd bring food from home to eat instead of eating there. Some film shoots were early in the morning and we could roam the park the same day before everyone else showed up, so we were the first in line for everything. It was pretty nice. And 4, my dad has this strange habit of befriending random strangers at events and them having extra tickets to places. He'd also have friends that knew about free concerts and festivals everywhere in the state of Florida. We had free tickets to see the circus twice, the Knights Jousting on Horses dinner thing, medieval times, a lot of figure ice skating shows, so many museums, and a crapload of concerts. 5. He and my mum always entered radio contests and they were lucky enough to win a lot of them. More free concerts and some really good seats. Once saw Elton John in the first few rows. Saw Michael Bublé just when he was getting popular. Funny story, during the concert, Michael hugged my mum. 6. My dad would bid on eBay for vacations to timeshares on weeks the owners couldn't use instead of buying nights for hotels. We stayed in a nice cabin in rural Virginia for cheap. We stayed in a ritzy presidential suite in Washington, D.C. for dirt cheap as well. This was back when the internet wasn't as popular, so I'm not sure that these rental timeshares are still a thing now. I could go on, but overall my childhood was a lot of fun even if my parents were stingy. I feel like their stinginess really helped us go so many places as kids because they were driven to find all these free events because, in the end, it was really fun for them to do. Well, good on you for seeing the silver lining. And it seems like their stinginess might have been your parents' thing as a couple. It seems like they thrived doing it together. Just goes to show there's someone for everyone. My father gets free boxes at the post office. Free as in you're supposed to fill it, bring it back and pay to ship it. He skips that part and just takes the priority mailboxes home with him. Didn't know about this routine until around Valentine's Day when we were running errands and he said he had to stop to get a free gift box for my mum. Sometimes he'll grab a couple of the cushy bubble envelopes to roll up and use as filler to keep the gift safe. My mum is the opposite. She always buys boxes, wrap, tissue paper, ribbons, and tags, so at least one of them supports the gift decor industry. Sorry, USPS. So I work at a grocery store, and every year we have a donation competition for muscular dystrophy. We have people sign and buy shamrocks that go on the walls, and we have a small cup for change donations. One day, a lady comes in, very rude, resting witch face. Everything's a problem, you get it. So as I was checking her out, she digs through her wallet looking for a $100 bill, and the order was $53.59. She found the bill, and instead of taking change, she goes, "Looks like there's 59 cents in here," and digs 59 cents from the donation cup. I wanted to say something, but she would have made a scene. Instead, I just threw $1 into the cup. Bought a cheap imitation cell phone case that looked like one from OtterBox, destroyed it, and went to the OtterBox shop to get a replacement. There's a big fishing tournament every summer near me, and the people that set it up go to Home Depot and buy like $2,000 worth of flowers and then just return them after the event. Worked at Wendy's one summer when I was in high school. This one guy would come in and order a large size of fries. He'd dump half of the fries into the bag and come back and say that he wanted fresh fries and that these ones tasted too stale. I only caught what he was doing because I'd noticed that one of the times he complained, the fries had just come out of the fryer. Hang out with a group of friends, about 6 to 7 people, and we decide to chip in for a large meal except for one guy, who said he's not that hungry because he just ate. When the meal arrived, we all started eating and chatting at the same time, and that guy just kept eating, and once he was done, he pretended he got a call and left us. My friend went to stay with a new boyfriend who she'd met on eHarmony. They'd met a few times before, talked on the phone loads, and hadn't spent that much time together. On her first night there, he poured them each a glass of red wine. She was exhausted and only drank half of her glass before she was ready to go to bed. He put the glass with the remaining wine in the refrigerator. The next morning with breakfast, he pulled the glass out of the fridge. She didn't touch it. Again, he put it back in the refrigerator. Again, that night for dinner, he pulled the glass out and ended up putting it back in the refrigerator. At this point, she wasn't drinking it on principle. The next night, they went to a function at a hotel. She did drink a glass of wine there, and he tipped $1 to the bartender. When they got home, he pulled up QuickBooks and entered the $1 into his budget. She left the next day. Yep, he pulled out the glass of wine as she was packing to go. She finally snatched the glass and downed it in one giant gulp. She said it was disgusting. That was the last time they ever saw each other. Non-Americans. What is the most shocking thing you saw when visiting the United States? I'm Canadian, and I went on a brief road trip to the States about a month ago. The most shocking thing I experienced was how cheap the food is. We went to McDonald's and a meal for 3 people only cost about $14, and one of the meals was a salad. In Canada, one meal costs about $8. I knew the food was cheap there, but damn. Woke up early on vacation in Florida, and the sidewalk outside my hotel was absolutely covered in lizards, and it was amazing. How hard it is to get a drink. I'm Irish and over 21, and in California, even with a passport and driver's license, I was treated with skepticism. Blood started to enter my alcohol stream a few times while I was there. Ugh. Rite Aid. I can get a flu shot, HIV test, a bottle of tequila, Snickers bars, and pizza pockets all from the same store. Awesome. IHOP. I can get an entire day's worth of calories in one meal. Also, having $1 notes made me feel like I was rich. I had a huge wad of notes, but like 20 of them were $1. But still, it's a nice feeling. Speaking as a European who's visited America, this final part of the story is absolutely true. It feels special to whip out a stack of notes and slap them on the table like a mob kingpin. The first time I had to deal with TSA was enlightening. Wanted to punch the prick. Now I know that's basically normal. I'm from Singapore, and we're pretty much a conservative and reserved society. I visited the US for an elective program at UCLA, Go Bruins, and the thing that struck me most about America was everyone's friendliness or socialness. People strike up a conversation with you, ask how your day's been, and really connect with each other based on what's happening around them. The weather, how long the wait for the bus is, etc. And somehow, these fleeting connections were very real and genuine to me. I came back home a much more enlightened person with my horizons very much broadened. So thank you, Americans, for showing me simple human kindness. You have to flipping drive everywhere. Again, as a person from a country with a compact built environment, this resonates with me. My cousin from Vietnam flew into America sometime in December, and she recalled that her first reaction was, "Wow, there's so much sugar covering the ground." It was snow, but she really thought we sprinkled sugar everywhere for sweets and giggles. Why she's never heard of snow, I don't know, but it was adorably hilarious. As an Australian who just came back from America this year,
What the flip, man? You guys have pretzel M&Ms. Share that stuff around. Flip.
I was told I speak very good English. I'm English. My neighbor Dmitri visit New York once. He say there was surprising lack of goats, which may not be bad thing. In the South, how in your face the religion was. Signs up on cafes, it being referred to a lot in conversation, and just everywhere I got confronted by religion. The patriotism as well, such as flags being up in so many yards. I had heard this, but I guess I didn't expect it to be so much like the stereotypes I imagined in my head. I found Americans insanely friendly as well, much more so than expected, and this applied to all places I went to other than New York City. I lived in China until 1999/grade 5 in elementary school, then our family moved to Dallas, Texas. Within the next year, the following things were very surprising to me. Everything is ridiculously big, from the size of our apartment to people's houses to the size of roads to the length of time it takes to get downtown. We lived in North Dallas near Arapahoe and Hillcrest. School classrooms resembled something like a wonderland. There were bright colors everywhere, tables are put together into clumps instead of ordered in neat rows from back to front. Then there were stuffed papier-mâché animals on the walls with people's names on it, cute little mailboxes for everyone, TVs and computers in every classroom, a cafeteria filled with tasty foods and snacks, and a playground with swings. We were learning 400 times 5 equals 2,000 in math class. The nice people at church actually took their religion seriously. Actually believed it to be real. I always thought religions were stories you learn because they were important cultural stories that had some education value, like the story of Prometheus giving fire to humans, for example. I was working at my uncle's restaurant in California when I saw a man at the bar who was looking pale and seemed to be out of it. His hands were clammy and he was not fully aware. I knew these were symptoms of a heart attack and he was unresponsive, so I called the ambulance. When the ambulance arrived, he seemed embarrassed by all of it. He did not want to go to the hospital. He asked what he would be charged for the ambulance. The paramedics then tried to convince him for about an hour to go to the hospital. He declined over and over again. I offered to drive him home, but he declined that too. This experience really hit home and made me feel for my neighbors in the United States. In Canada, people don't have to make a decision about something like this. The fact that people have to make health decisions and make their own diagnosis, prognostication, and take these kinds of risks made me really feel for people who are uninsured/uncovered. As someone who has had reconstructive labrum surgery, tonsil/adenoid removal, and several other emergency room experiences, I vowed to never complain about the medical service I receive in Canada, regardless of how long I have to wait. I got beat up real bad one time and someone called an ambulance. I tried to refuse, but they talked me into going with them to make sure I didn't have a concussion or internal bleeding. I even tried to talk them out of giving me an MRI or maybe CAT scan once I got there, since I didn't have insurance. The nurses said not to worry about that. Total bills were $7,004. Whole camps of homeless people living under highway overpasses in New Orleans.
In New Orleans, those people are referred to as the middle class.
I was in the M&M superstore in Times Square, and I saw a woman so fat, just so fat, she used a scooter. That's unfortunately not exceptionally unusual. I'm from Australia, and I couldn't believe how high the water levels are in your toilet. My berries nearly touched the water. Also, you drive through ATMs. Crazy.
Yeah, when I went there, I suddenly realized why their toilets overflow when they get clogged.
This is a very strange and alien thing to most of us outside the country. Perhaps someone can explain it. A homeless man in Seattle called me a good-for-nothing N-word, word for word. Keep in mind that at the time this happened, I was a 14-year-old white kid with a steadier job than he had.
Homeless people are like ghosts in America. Nobody acknowledges them, we are frightened by them, and even sometimes amused.
I was at a McDonald's in the US, and no one kicked my ass for wearing my futuristic computer glasses.
Because it isn't like Paris.
Tax. Why not put a flipping price sticker that includes it, so I don't have to work out if I have enough money for everything? Yes, this is so true. I've had to bust out the calculator in advance for nearly every major transaction. Wouldn't say it would be shocking, but just a tad startling. Basically, flags. Flags everywhere. On the pavements, in the windows, on the side of buildings, up poles, on cars, on doors, on posters, pretty much anything it could be stuck to. Oh, and the real comfy feeling of diners. Genuinely felt welcome in any I went for a cup of tea in. Always got a raised eyebrow and a question when I asked for hot tea instead of iced tea. I'm from Canada too, and I visited Anaheim. Portion sizes were gigantic. I swear they slaughtered 5 chickens for my girlfriend's dish at the Cheesecake Factory. The next morning's breakfast at the hotel was huge too. I felt like I was going to explode after. Also, corn syrup and everything. The ketchup and Coke were thick. Was definitely weird, and I wasn't a big fan of it. Seriously, if you're wondering why you have an obesity problem, this and the last point are part of it. I know obesity is a global issue, but fixing it starts at home. I was also surprised with how friendly and forward people were. Random strangers would talk to us, and staff were nice. Everyone spoke louder than back home too. This wasn't just at Disneyland, but also at small places on Newport. Speaking of Newport, we went to Balboa Island. Just off the island is a huge plastic surgery complex. That was interesting. Oh, and Americans take their schools seriously. Many houses on Balboa had university flags flying, and I saw a lot of UCLA and USC shirts. Oh, and girls breaking into song in the middle of the street? I found this confusing. I wasn't sure whether to find it endearing or cheesy. If anyone did that back home, people would think they're insane. But in America, I saw this multiple times. Holy car! I didn't expect that many responses to this. So to clear some things up that are getting repeated in the comments, I now understand that Canada also has HFCS in many foods. However, I did still find Coke and ketchup sweeter and more syrupy. That's what I meant by thicker. In regards to Cheesecake Factory, we ate there the day we arrived. There's not much choice in local food when you're on the Disneyland resort. Plus, my girlfriend's organization she volunteers for sends the people they help to Cheesecake, so there was a bit of meaning to it. Oh, and in regard to schools, that's interesting that it's sports teams. I believe my school, the University of Alberta, has pretty good teams, but no one really cares unless they're directly affiliated with them. They seem more like clubs here. Interesting to see the difference there. I'm also leaning towards good in regards to girls singing. Life could always be more like Hairspray. My first visit to America was Detroit. I haven't been back to America since. See, the problem is you went to Detroit. 90% of American citizens are too afraid to visit Detroit. Hey, lay off Detroit. Them people are living in Mad Max times. I was on the West Coast for about 2 months a couple of years ago. I'm from the Netherlands. Things that struck me. Portion sizes. Your small pizza is our large pizza. Your medium pizza is our family pizza. Your large pizza doesn't fit inside our borders. Clean streets. I saw a lot of $1,000 littering fine signs. Must have worked because there wasn't so much as a cigarette butt on the streets. Space! You have a lot of it. Everything is bigger, taller, larger, wider, and further apart. Food is cheaper than in Europe. Alcohol is more expensive. I figured out why you don't see a lot of American cars outside of America. I'll stop here before I insult people. I visited a Giants game in San Francisco and couldn't believe my eyes when Giants and Cardinals fans were sharing a couple of beers and eating hot dogs together while cheering for different teams. In Europe, we have to separate soccer fans from the moment they arrive in the game city until the second they leave, to stop them from bashing each other's heads in. Also, the entertainment value with all the songs and games is much higher than in European sports matches. TLDR, when you're from Europe and visit the USA, it's like somebody puts the contrast on your TV on maximum and turns the volume up. Rich people are richer, poor people are poorer, sweets are sweeter, laws are stricter, sports are more fun, everything is bigger, and man, do you guys build crappy cars. The amount of self-segregation that blacks and whites do in St. Louis, a city whose black-white population is basically 50-50. I almost never saw mixed-race groups of people socializing. It was either all black or all white. The two societies are almost separate. I have been here for 3 months on an internship. Things I have noticed. That whole patriotism and American ideal is dead in the youth. No one believes in the American dream anymore. Every young person I have met has said, yeah, this country kind of sucks, but what can you do? And I am in the South. Also, the fact that it seems no one cooks. I prepare my own lunch and make my meals because it's cheaper and healthier. People seemed strange to know that as a 20-year-old male, I can cook and choose to. Also, the use of elevators. I have not seen people take the elevator down from the second floor so many times in my life. I'm sure this will all get buried, but the 1 or 2 of you who make it this far, high five! Speaking in terms of Americans I've met, I can say that I have met equal amounts of patriots and the disillusioned amongst the young and old alike. I thought fat people in Taiwan were fat, but then I saw Americans. Almost no Taiwanese are considered fat to me now. I spent a summer in Canada, but we went down to Chicago to go to Lollapalooza. On the way back, our bus had a stopover in Detroit. We left the bus terminal to get some food and passed by a taxi rank. One of the drivers asked, "You boys need a lift?" We politely declined, but he was eager as can be. "What do you want then? Wacky tobacco?" We explained that we were about to cross the border into Canada and didn't want any wacky tobacco, thanks. "White powder?" "No thanks, kind taxi man." "Smack?" I was shocked. Taxi drivers in Ireland are reluctant to even drive anywhere. American taxi drivers are significantly more helpful and seem to provide a much wider range of services. Other shocking things about America include the drinking age being 21. Quite how fat the people manage to get. That's not to say that all Americans are fat, just that those that are fat are really flipping fat. The existence of Four Loko. The people that hold rock and roll will kill your soul signs outside festivals. Heinz ketchup has different ingredients in America and is slightly less nice. It's really hard to narrow it down to one thing, so I'm not going to. The anti-child termination billboards, they horrified me, not in the way they intended. Along the same vein, people handing out anti-child termination propaganda outside a Nine Inch Nails concert. Only stuff I get handed at concerts here is for trashy clubs with their band-themed after-parties. The attitude of servers in restaurants. If someone messed up, the amount of apologies I would get, they were practically begging for my forgiveness, so I didn't leave them without a tip. It was awful. Religious shopping channel programs. There was a nun on TV trying to sell me a figurine of baby Jesus. I've never seen anything like it. US flags everywhere. So many. That level of continual patriotism seems almost redundant when you're smack bang in the middle of the country. Heck, I could easily keep going, but I'll leave it at that. Oh, one more. Americans call the main meal the entree. Mind-boggling. Brazilian here. Everything is so flipping cheap. From food to soda to cars and computers. Everything is a tenth of the flipping international price. And also, gas. When I was in America visiting my folks, the lady with nice hair on CNN was complaining about the gas prices, and I noticed something didn't seem right with the numbers, so I made a few conversions and started laughing. No one in the room got it. 1 liter of gas in America, $1.04. 1 liter of gas in Brazil, $3,017. I've never been to the US, but the most shocking thing I found out about America recently was that it's legal to not only carry a piece around with you for no reason at all, but to carry them openly as if you're flipping Rambo or something. I knew that many Americans own more ordnance than the military, but I just assumed they had to remain inside the house. For home protection, I hear all the time. I didn't realize you can just walk around armed to the teeth. Hey wife, going to McDonald's. Where's my ammunition? I'll come with you. Need to give my 45 a walk. Not trying to start another massive debate or anything, I'm just saying, to my perspective, that is absolutely crazy. In Australia, only the police carry weapons, and even then they are very, very rarely used. The police get in more trouble for shooting people than they would just letting them get away with crimes. Human life is considered very valuable, even criminals. And just to be clear, because the firearms are great, there are laws, replies are already starting, please note that I'm not trying to offend or judge anybody. This is simply my perspective on something that is shocking to me about the United States, as asked by the OP. I'm from New Zealand, visited California a few years ago. While getting a haircut, the lady asked me where I was from. I said, New Zealand. She then proceeded to try guess what state I was in until I told her it was a country. She then refuses to believe that New Zealand is a country, no matter what I told her about my country. That amazed me. Another thing was the guy at the airport asking if we still hunt and eat the Maori. That was asked after he asked whether or not we had indoor plumbing in New Zealand. It was then that I realized most Americans I met were extremely narrow-minded and thought the world outside the US was an undeveloped place totally reliant on their great country. Most people were quite friendly, though. Most shocking thing I saw? Poverty. Absolute poverty. I visited the States 5 times, and each and every time it is impossible not to notice a huge problem with poverty. I'm Irish, so coming to the States I had a high enough standard on how a first world country should be. And it was as sad as it was shocking to notice how badly some people had it. Chicago. Well, I've been in Chicago quite a bit, with O'Hare being the main international airport for me, and it's not the worst, but some of the houses in which I've seen people come out of, and the number of homeless, has left me speechless. I've been in Chicago in the middle of winter, and that stuff is cold. I don't understand how people manage to survive. Washington and New York, they're about on the same level. In the center of these cities you can see the wealth, but venture outside them a little and the striking difference in living conditions is amazing. Just by looking like I had money, I've nearly been mugged twice. Los Angeles. LA was alright, except for the fact that if you get on the tram to venture from the city center out to Long Beach, you pass through some seriously trash-looking neighborhoods. It's scary, actually, that the population of Ireland lives in this small area, and they're so badly off compared to us. Also, lots of homeless, like lots. New Orleans. What the actual flip? I've never met nicer people in my life. Never. But what the actual flipping flip? How can you let people live like that? It's disgraceful. If you just walk outside the normal tourist area, you're into a place with high crime/violence, and you can see why. They have nothing. There's a massive gap between the rich and poor, and you seriously need to do something about it. The fact that America is built for cars and not for people. Excluding the original 13 colonies and some major cities, hello, New York and Boston, San Francisco and Chicago, the United States is built on a scale where the basic unit of measurement is not a human being, but a Ford F-150, at least. The streets are gargantuan, the endless sprawl of buildings is just mind-boggling, and when someone says, "It's only 15 minutes, they mean it's a 15-minute drive on the freeway, and not a 15-minute walk. Everything is car-centered, and without a car you ain't going nowhere. No wonder there is so much drunk driving. There is no other option for the people to get around. The exceptions are the cities that have a working rail-based public transport system. People here can get around like they do in the rest of the world. The scale of the place, the fact that everything is so insanely spread around, makes the entire urban area of the country seem incredibly empty, anonymous, unwelcoming, and just depressing at times. Showed someone who worked in a hotel in Mississippi my passport as a form of identification. She had never seen one before despite working in the hospital industry. I believe her exact words were, "Wow, you've got like a whole book there." Who is someone that we praise but was actually a horrible person? Chris Gardner, the man who Will Smith played in The Pursuit of Happiness, is considered to be an amazing success story, an inspiration, and a great father. He actually cheated on his wife with a dental student and got her pregnant. He then started dating said dental student and reportedly beat her. He was even taken in by police because of a domestic abuse charge. Dr. Seuss was having an affair with a woman while his wife had cancer. His wife killed herself because of it. Charles Dickens dumped his wife of 10 kids and 22 years for an 18-year-old mistress. When she called him out on it, he publicly called her a fat jackass. I'll just repost my answer to a question similar to this that was posted a while back. James Cameron. His movies are great, but he's such a butt. There's a reason why the crews to your movies are constantly revolting against you. He's been married 5 times. His marriage to Linda Hamilton ended after just 8 months because he was caught cheating with Susie Amis, who played Rose's granddaughter in the Titanic. He called agnosticism cowardly atheism. Orson Scott Card described him as selfish and cruel while working on the novelization to The Abyss. After working with Cameron on Titanic, Kate Winslet decided she would not work with him again unless she's earned a lot of money. She said that Cameron is a nightmare to work with. Studios have come to fear his habit of straying way over schedule and over budget. He is notorious on set for his uncompromising and dictatorial manner, as well as his flaming temper. Sam Worthington said Cameron would use a nail gun to nail the crew's cell phones to a wall in retaliation for unwanted ringing during production of Avatar. The first editor of The Terminator got fed up with Cameron and refused to edit the movie to Cameron's specifications. He did it so he could get fired. The crew that worked on Aliens walked off set. The entire crew. They eventually came back after a lengthy negotiation and an apology from Cameron for his conduct. Composer James Horner refused to work with him for 10 years after doing the score to Aliens. Ed Harris and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio still refuse to talk about their experience working with him on The Abyss. Some few things that are known is that Cameron ordered the actors to go to the bathroom in their diving suits to save time between takes, and every actor in the movie had major breakdowns at some point during the production of the movie. One of the few things that Harris has said is that he was driving home one day while shooting and spontaneously started crying, and he had to pull to the side of the road until he stopped. Mastrantonio has just said it was a horrible experience. The cast had to relieve their anger by completely destroying their dressing rooms, tossing couches and ripping the walls apart. Cameron has admitted that the only reason why he made the Titanic was to get the studio to finance his dive to the actual ship. He went to the studio, opened a book of Titanic paintings and said, "This ship, Romeo and Juliet." They greenlit the movie on the spot. His reputation is legendary in the business. During the 70th Golden Globe Awards, Amy Poehler joked about the controversy around the depiction of the torture in Zero Dark 30, a film co-produced and directed by Cameron's second wife, Catherine Bigelow. Poehler said, "When it comes to torture, I trust the lady who spent 3 years married to James Cameron." Wow, I knew that Cameron and the film crew of Aliens didn't get along, but I didn't realize he was the directing equivalent of Edward Norton. Steve Harvey. He was married 3 times and cheated. All 3 times. As a result, he was divorced 3 times. Still writes books on relationships, not to mention his views/lack of understanding of evolution. Abe Lincoln got the nickname Honest Abe because of impartial judgment during cockfights. Okay, so I desperately wanted this to be true, but I've done some research, and this anecdote appears to be one of a number of many small events that might possibly have contributed to the name Honest Abe. Not a single person, but the Kennedy family, especially Ted Kennedy, who had an affair with his secretary, got into a car accident with her while DUI, and then left her to die. He also got expelled from Harvard for academic dishonesty several years before that. I believe that when Ted had the accident that killed the girl, he called his political advisor before calling an ambulance. His old man was a Nazism apologist as well, chose to seek appeasement with the Führer, even though he knew that Jews were being massacred and most of Europe was being flattened. Also refused to allow the US Congress to give aid to the UK to fight Germany, and was later involved in helping fund the IRA. I believe when Ted had the accident that killed the girl, he called his political advisor before calling an ambulance. By current standards, pretty much everyone who lived on the planet before about 1800. Michael Jordan was a bit of an a-hole. Can't knock his game, but you can find a lot of bad stuff about him with a simple Google search if you're interested. A bit? That's an understatement. I've never read a single account of a story that portrays Michael Jordan as a decent person, or even just a person who isn't a jerk. Jordan is notorious for being a huge D-bag. Andrew Jackson. From the spoil system to the Trail of Tears, thanks again, Mr. Jackson. Let us honor your achievements by placing you on our $20 bill. Well, the guy hated paper money, so putting him on the $20 bill is a big F you to him. I have one of his violins. It's weird, considering I'm 1/4 Cherokee. My biggest problem with Thomas Edison was the blatant lies he would spread in order to retain a financial monopoly on power generation. He would travel and run demonstrations of why alternating current is dangerous by electrocuting an animal with something like 5,000 volts, claiming that it was 1/4 of the voltage intended to be used to transmit power, in order to scare people into accepting direct current as the only safe form of electrical transmission. Equivalent DC voltage would have been much more destructive, but he always withheld that information. Horrible is a strong word, but any of the Scientology celebrities, I'd have to say. I'm always surprised by who is a part of it. Woody Allen. To this day, my husband refuses to believe that he is scummy.
Oh, come on! What kind of scummy man would marry his daughter?
Flipping Oprah. Oprah is the only reason people ever even started to pay attention to this entire Jenny McCarthy autism vaccines bullpoop. She is the only reason people trust Dr. Phil to give advice. Spoiler alert, he should not be counseling people, and she's the reason my grandma says stuff like,
But Dr. Oz said that if I eat a lot of green coffee and rub acai beans on my face, I'll look 40.
Still love you though, Grandma. Oprah has caused a lot of bullpoop. F Oprah. I hate the hip, quirky reputation Bill Murray has managed to get over the past few years. I used to work at a place where he was occasionally a customer. He's kind of a dismissive jerk. He can be exceptionally rude to the people around him.
I understand that celebrities want to be left alone in public like everyone else, but he was often unpleasant with the staff, and nobody there acted like a gawky fan with famous people. We had other famous customers, some much more notable and important than him, and we knew not to make celebrities uncomfortable. Stephen Colbert, David Cross, Joe Biden, all lovely and gracious. Bill Murray is just a complete member for the sake of being one. Jimmy Savile. Over here in the UK, he had his own TV show and was a celebrity, until after he died it was revealed that he was fixing more than the children's wishes. I guess it's past tense, being praised, but yeah. Richard Dawkins is simply immature, his charity was stolen from, and he is simply rude. The only reason he is relevant in the mainstream is because he wrote an edgy book. If it wasn't for that, he would have been just another scientist in another lab, written about only in specific journals. Dawkins is brilliant within his field. The man knows a lot about evolution, but he's a condescending, judgmental a-hole when it comes to other folks' faith. I'm an atheist myself, but I can't stand the way Dawkins talks about religious people, and there have been a fair number of allegations of sexism against him as well. The atheist community could do so much better than Dawkins. I can't stand Dawkins. He's so gosh darn smug. If you're going to be a smug anti-theist, at least be a hilarious alcoholic bohemian like Christopher Hitchens. I'm inclined to agree with the people commenting on this. Dawkins may be smart, but they really need to run his commentary through a spin doctor first. I wouldn't say horrible, but Nelson Mandela is given a free ride on a lot of things. I'm going from memory here and on mobile, so I'm sure someone will correct any errors. For starters, he promised South Africa the Freedom Charter, essentially a 1945 UK-style welfare state, whilst simultaneously selling much of the country's industry off to foreign companies. He had written a lot in Robben Island about how the only way South Africa could go forward was by nationalising industry. He essentially promised a welfare state he knew he couldn't provide, and doomed the poorest of the nation. John Pilgar's Freedom Next Time is a fantastic book about this. He argues that in part thanks to Mandela's actions, South Africa became an economic apartheid, which was just as bad for the people in townships than actual apartheid. He also supported Mbeki's assertions that HIV didn't cause AIDS, and that anti-retroviral drugs were a Western conspiracy. The thing is, weighed against the good he did in South Africa, and how much he helped that country heal, perhaps it isn't that significant. It just annoys me that people are completely unwilling to recognize any of these pretty big flaws. I would treat him as a George Washington. He's not a man who lived, he's the father of the nation and gets a lot of passes for that. You need something to center the culture on. He's a myth, not a man. Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin kidnapped a 14-year-old girl. Wow, I never knew this. In 1972, Page was hanging around a nightclub and laid eyes on 14-year-old Laurie Maddox. He liked what he saw and didn't give a flip that she was underage by, well, a lot. Why should he, after all? The club clearly didn't. As the young, handsome lead guitarist in the biggest rock band in the world, Page was probably very shy and awkward around girls. So, instead he sent roadie Richard Cole to Maddox's table with the message, "Jimmy told me that he's going to have you whether you like it or not." The roadie then grabbed her and chucked her in the back of the limo, saying, "You effing move and I'll effing have your head." From there, they drove back to Page's house, where he and Maddox proceeded to have lots and lots of dirty, unspeakable acts. Of course, Page knew this was incredibly wrong, and if word got out, he was screwed. So he did the only responsible thing he could think of. For 3 long years, Maddox was for the most part kept behind closed doors, so the relationship with Page wasn't discovered, and he wouldn't end up in jail. King Arthur. Dude ain't even real. John Wayne. I believe in white supremacy, at least to a point where African Americans are responsibly educated. He was also an aggressive drunk and a draft dodger despite playing heroic roles. Pablo Picasso, genius artist though he undeniably was, treated the people in his life like trash. Affairs on top of affairs. He drove his first wife into a mental breakdown and literally turned their only son into Picasso's chauffeur. He had a child with his first mistress, who he played mind games with on a daily basis for the rest of her life. After he died, she killed herself. His second mistress, he drove into a mental breakdown. His third, he physically abused. He did have 2 children with her, who he refused to legally acknowledge for years. And his second and final wife, treated like a doormat, who also ended up killing herself after he died. Oh, and after he died, his second wife barred all of his previous family from his funeral, including his grandson, who was so distraught by this, he killed himself too. Amazing, amazing artist, but totally effing sadistic in how he treated the people around him. Oliver Cromwell is massively praised and admired in Britain, often making it into lists of the top 10 greatest Britons in British history. Meanwhile, he is universally vilified in Ireland, and regularly makes it into lists of the top 10 greatest villains in Irish history. I find it quite amazing that the British ignore his genocidal campaigns in Ireland and prefer to erect massive statues of him outside their parliament instead. I mean, I know I'm supposed to praise dear leader, but Kim Jong-un is kind of a d-hole. Arnold Schwarzenegger, illegitimate child with the maid working in his house, reduced the sentence of a convicted murderer for a political friend, signed into law the biggest tax increase in California ever whilst campaigning for lower taxes, and an overall disgusting political weasel. And yet, still one of the more respectable figures in the modern GOP. Jebediah Springfield, aka Hans Sprungfeld. Ronald Reagan was probably involved in the Iran-Contra affair and dealing with Iran before the election against Carter. Republican ties let Iran know they'd get a better deal if they waited until after the election was decided to release the hostages, after which Reagan's staff sold them weapons for gold, which was then funneled into South American right-wing terrorist organizations that killed thousands of people in cold blood. That and his economic policies have led to a lot of the crap we are dealing with today. Mother Teresa. She said that people needed to suffer to be closer to God and would deny medical care to people under her care, so they would suffer and die. One case that changed my opinion was a teenage boy who had a kidney problem easily fixed by surgery, but the nuns of the order refused to allow him to be taken, and instead just gave him aspirin and waited for him to die. She also diverted a lot of the money donated meant for helping poor people towards extreme pro-life positions, including stopping legal contraception. John Lennon. Not only was his talent blown out of proportion, Imagine is probably the most overrated song of all time, and unintelligent, he was clueless about social issues, he was a pretty horrible person in general. He would beat his family and verbally abuse his son, Julian, who stated publicly that Paul was more of a father to him. On one occasion, Julian was laughing, and John yelled, "I hate the way you effing laugh," and sent him away. There is a long list of horrible things he has done. Winston Churchill wanted to start World War III against Russia the moment Germany was divided up. Oh, and William Wallace. After the Battle of Stirling Bridge, he skinned one of the English lords and made a belt out of his skin. Even for the time, it was needlessly barbaric. Steve Jobs. Misogynist, all but abandoned his daughter for years, a-hole to most people he met. Most Appleites will tell you that he sucked as a boss, and that Tim Cook is far better. He deserved to get fired by his own company, as he did early on. Marlon Brando showed up to Apocalypse Now 50 pounds overweight and didn't know a single word of his lines, which is the reason he appears in shadows the whole movie. He's also notorious for being extremely difficult to work with on sets, often never memorizing his lines and having cue cards. The fact that he didn't prepare for roles and was reading cue cards makes his acting even more impressive. Snoop Dogg or Lion or whatever the flip his name is now. People seem to forget that he actually murdered someone but got away with it, but everyone praises him as a chill dude who smokes herb and advocates for legalization. Isaac Newton. Seems like he went out of his way to demolish Leibniz for having independently developed calculus. Christopher Columbus was a horrible human being who pioneered the sex human traffic trade in the Americas using 9 to 10-year-old girls. He was also wildly racist toward the Lucayan natives of the West Indies and once said, "I could conquer the whole lot of them with 50 men and govern them as I pleased." Yet he is honored in the same way Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln are, with a holiday thanks to the Knights of Columbus, a 20th century all-male Catholic group who lobbied Roosevelt for a Catholic role model for boys to look up to. J.D. Rockefeller was a huge piece of poo who tried to cover it by donating a huge chunk of his fortune to universities and medical research. Really though, he was an a-hole. He rigged up explosives in mines and blew them up to send his miners running. The ones that made it up to the surface were then shot as they ran out of the mines. Of course, Rockefeller denied that he had anything to do with it. Jerry Lewis, the telethon guy. He reaped all this goodwill while taking advantage of children with disabilities, using them for his tearjerker broadcasts. He has made awful public comments like that people with MD are living as half a person, and has called people cripples, and reacted poorly to people criticizing the way he strips disabled people of their dignity. The telethon has refused to make their financial records available and account for where all their donations go. Jeremy Clarkson. Venerated by many Redditors, yet he possesses many of the qualities that would make most people here label anyone who had those qualities an industrial-strength D-bag and a-hole. Uses racist language, makes offensive comments, cheats on his wife, punches a co-worker because he doesn't like the food he's given his co-worker a mouthful of abuse for no good reason, then laughs about it because he thinks he has a guaranteed fan base that will turn a blind eye to his scumbaggery. Also, he knows whatever he does, he is financially bulletproof. If the BBC kick him out, another network will pay a fortune to have him on their books. That last bit aged really well. It seems that a few people here have only ever learned about Guy Fawkes from V for Vendetta. So here's a reason to toss out your Hot Topic mask, in addition to the whole sweatshop labor thing. Dude was a religious zealot. The entire goal was to get rid of those danged Protestants. He didn't want to blow up Parliament while being the first person to scream, "Anarchy in the UK." He had a very clear idea of the government that he wanted to replace the current one with. The group of conspirators were kinda basically the Catholic version of religion-based terrorist cell. Additional fun facts that don't contribute to him being a jerk. He was just the guy who got caught, since he was the one in charge of setting the fuse. He changed his name to Guido when he was in Spain trying to muster up help to dismantle the Protestant powers in England. Che Guevara, who helped Fidel Castro overthrow the Cuban government and has since become the poster boy for revolution. Anyone who spoke against the revolution was taken by his guerrilla, murdered and buried. They would then return the burial address to their widows. Frank Lloyd Wright. There are many stories of him not paying people and how much of an ass he was because of his ego. He told his boss, Sullivan, to give him a 5-year contract and enough money for a house which he built on the outskirts of Chicago, and then started designing homes behind Sullivan's back for wealthy clients. He left his first wife and 6 kids for a client's wife, and they went to Europe for a year. He came back, got money from his mom, and settled in Wisconsin. It was there that a servant set the house/studio on fire and murdered Wright's second wife, her 2 children, and 4 others. Wright married again, but she was addicted to morphine and was divorced after a year or so. Despite charging high-end clients a lot of money, he was always short on money because he brought a lot of art, which was destroyed in the fires at his home/studio. There are also stories of him being rude to clients and telling them to stick it. Amazing architect, though. Probably anyone before 1960 we praise was damn near absolutely a racist. Plenty after too, for that matter. It's a hard question because of moral relativity. Is it okay to judge past people by modern standards? Furthermore, as Lord Atton said, paraphrased, great men are almost always bad men. Great men like Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan were undoubtedly genocidal by today's standard. Also, the question of what constitutes bad. Gandhi was a racist. Mother Teresa espoused Catholic doctrine and taught the poor complacency while bringing in money for the church that could have better been spent to improve the lives of those she purported to help. Martin Luther King Jr. cheated on his wife. Short answer, all of them. Great and good people are still only human. They all had flaws. Doctors who have given a second opinion diagnosis, what is the worst first opinion you've ever encountered? I'm a surgeon. Most patients come to me after having seen another physician who has diagnosed them with something and told the patient to see a surgeon. I've been called to see more than one patient for appendicitis who has already had an appendectomy. I've also been called in multiple cases for patients who very obviously have previously undiscovered very advanced cancer. It's always too far advanced for me to be of help, so I have to wonder, am I being called so I can be the bad guy and explain everything? Yes. The answer is yes. This is the opposite answer, but the best request for a second opinion came from a CVS Minute Clinic. Young, healthy law student goes to Minute Clinic. Has the flu, this was a few years ago, no Rona, feels awful. They check him out. Yup, he has a fever. Aches, sore throat, it's the flu. Flu swab positive. His clinic vitals were notable for a heart rate of 140. A bit high, but not crazy high. Reassuring numbers are under 100. The guy otherwise walks into the CVS and is a healthy young guy. Would have been pretty easy to dismiss it. Anyway, the minute clinic says go to the ER, you need an EKG. So the guy follows orders. ER chief complaint is, I have the flu and CVS told me to come here. ER gets an EKG and he's in slow VT, which is a life-threatening arrhythmia that you have to be shocked out of. They take a look at his heart and it was giant and barely moving. He had an insane myocarditis. Dude ended up getting cannulated for ECMO within hours, cardiac bypass machines as life support. I can't say all Minutes clinics are the same, but holy crap, that was a great save. I'm a gynecologist. The number of times I've seen patients pregnant and upset or happy because some other doctor told them they can't get pregnant, so they didn't use birth control, is appalling. Usually, it's family med. Not ragging on all FM docs, just how it goes. I then have to explain that even if the patient has whatever condition that makes it unlikely for them to get pregnant, the odds are almost never 0%. Maybe less than 1%, but still not a zero, so of course it can happen. Well, when I first started feeling sick on the October of 1 year at college, I had a non-productive cough, night sweats and trouble sleeping, and I lost some weight. The school nurse gave me Claritin. All of those symptoms got worse, plus I was incredibly fatigued, my lymph nodes swelled up, and I had pretty bad backaches. My GP took a chest x-ray and prescribed antibiotics for pneumonia. At this point, I had almost failed out of school because I was only managing an hour or two of sleep per night. It took until spring break for me to go see a pulmonary specialist. He could instantly tell that it wasn't pneumonia. I had stage 4B Hodgkin's lymphoma. My first PET scan showed cancerous cells and lymph nodes in all 4 quadrants of my body. At this rate, I had lost about a third of my body weight. The cough, weight loss, and back pain were my swollen lymph nodes pressing on my lungs, stomach, and my back. They gave me my first round of chemo and I felt genuinely incredible. I felt like such crap that an IV mix of carefully measured toxins was an improvement. I went home and ate a whole pizza. Chemo got crappier, but it worked, so I guess I can't complain too much. I'm a lawyer, but had a client given a devastating diagnosis of an extremely rare heart condition. Doctor told him he had 6 weeks to live. He contacted me to make his will and set his affairs in order. Thankfully, he sought a second opinion with an extremely well-known cardiologist. I guess the cardiologist was intrigued due to the rare nature of the heart condition. There was nothing wrong with him. He was fine. This poor guy and his family were tortured over this, so devastated and terrified, for nothing. He actually called me to tell all of this. He seemed to still be in a joyous, I'm not going to die stage, but I imagine anger comes at some point when you take stock of what you went through. I don't know how a doctor flips up that massively, or if somehow my client's results were mixed up with someone else's, and some poor fellow's number is almost up and they don't even know it. Patient. When I was in college, I went to the doctor because I was peeing razors. It progressed pretty rapidly, and by the end of the week, I couldn't walk or sleep. The doctor asked me about my romantic life, and I told him the truth that my girlfriend and I had only been with each other and together for many years. He sort of scoffed at that and told me it was likely chlamydia. He had a long condescending speech about safe, fun times with me and then sent me home. A week later, my pee tests were back. Turns out I had the worst bladder infection they'd ever seen. I had to have a camera shoved up my pee hole, multiple rounds of antibiotics, and to this day I struggled to pee due to irreversible damage in the infection caused. I don't know about you listeners, but the story made the narrator feel sympathy pain in his nether regions. I have one that happened to me. I did college gymnastics. My senior year I had an accident in practice landing on my neck. Went to the hospital, got x-rays, was told I was perfectly fine. Walked around in pain for a while. Weeks later went to another doc, got a new set of images. My neck was broken in 3 places and had a dislocation. Had a multi-level fusion surgery days later. Found out my x-rays got swapped with someone else's in the ER, and I was originally diagnosed based on someone else's images. This was found out when I went to get my recordings long after my surgery for insurance purposes, and had my files and someone else's medical records and images in it. Because of the time I spent walking around with it, I have had a posterior surgery instead of anterior, which is way more invasive and gives me major issues to this day. Not a doctor. My husband had a situation where he almost died because of misdiagnosis. To preface this, at the time, we were young in our mid-20s, living in a college town. My husband had horrible pain, on floor, on hands and knees, horrible, We went to the ER and the doctor barely looked at him and just told him to stop drinking and it would be fine. We go home, the pain is getting worse and now he is vomiting. As soon as the doctor's office opens back home, where we grew up, we drove 1.5 hours to see our primary care. Within 15 minutes of walking into the GP office, my husband was rushed to emergency surgery. His gallbladder had almost completely ruptured and he was going septic. It was a total mess and he almost died because of a misdiagnosis. Obligatory, I am not the doctor, but the patient. I went to a sleep doctor because I was constantly tired and falling asleep standing up and such. Serious stuff. Doctor was like, well, you're overweight, so it's definitely sleep apnea. I did a sleep study, came back negative for sleep apnea. Doctor was like, well, I'm still positive it's sleep apnea because you're a porker. So he sent me home with a CPAP machine for a month. After a month of using the machine, which records your sleep apnea events every night and still said I didn't have sleep apnea, and with me having zero improvement in my symptoms, I went back to him and he said, well, if this isn't working, I can't help you because you obviously have sleep apnea, since all tubbos have sleep apnea, so you must not be using the CPAP. So I dropped him like a fresh turf and went to get a second opinion. New sleep doc, new sleep study. Came back and the new doctor says, yeah, this is textbook narcolepsy. You have all the symptoms and the sleep study proves it beyond a shadow of a doubt. I told him about the other doctor and he said, this is obviously narcolepsy. Your previous doctor was a moron. And unlike the other quotes in this story, this is an actual direct quote. I'll never forget the look of disgust on his face when he said the word moron. Not a doctor, but my sister was suffering from headaches and minor seizures for a while. Went to an urgent care and they told us that she had an anxiety disorder and just needed something to calm her down. We got a second opinion at the ER and turns out she had stage 4 brain cancer. I miss her every day. Wow, we trust doctors for so much and I'm sure that they're doing their best with the time they have. But stories like this, consider a second opinion sometimes, folks. I just left a practice partly because a woman brought her 8-month-old in for a second opinion. The practice owner had seen the rapidly enlarging sacral soft tissue mass, which the mother first noticed about 6 weeks prior. He told her not to worry about it. I checked his notes, which read, plan, ignore. I was shocked. There was a new onset rapidly enlarging blue-purple cystic mass on the baby's sacrum. It looked like a small plum under the skin at the top of her bum crack. And without any investigation, my colleague dismissed it. I was appalled. The mother was relieved. This wasn't the first not great judgment I've seen, but it was one of the worst. I realized I couldn't work in a clinic where I'd be stepping on other doctors' toes and couldn't trust their judgment. The babies had an imaging and a referral to a pediatric surgeon, but unfortunately I don't know the outcome because I'm working elsewhere now. Obligatory, I'm not a doctor, but when I had my wisdom teeth out, it was pretty brutal. Like they had to put me completely under, dig deep into my jawbone, the teeth were coming in sideways and upside down, just like the worst case scenario. So I have the surgery and the next couple of days I'm in a lot of pain, which happens. And I realize I have this growing hot lump on the side of my jawbone. Me being a dumbass, I tried to be like, oh, it'll go away. But it didn't, and my mum caught sight of it, and took me back to the guy who did my surgery. Dentist dude took an x-ray and without even examining it or asking any questions first, said I was fine and it was probably just scar tissue and told me to leave. I thought, hey, well, he's smarter than me, so I guess he's right. My mother, however, did not think this. And so off we go for a second opinion, and while we're headed over to the other office, the hard lump in my jaw bursts and blood and pus leaks everywhere in my mouth. It was so effing gross. My mum immediately turned around, drove back to the dental surgeon, dragged me, who was still spitting blood and pus, barged into the office and made the dental surgeon look in my mouth. The dental surgeon muttered something about hysterical women seeing things that weren't there, but prescribed me antibiotics and more pain meds anyway. And that was how the 1 to 2 week recovery took an entire month and I ended up having to drop out of a college course due to missing so much. I tasted this story. My uncle-in-law went to multiple doctors about leg pain and trouble walking. He's a big guy and every doctor told him in more or less condescending ways that his issue was that he needed to lose weight. After 5 years, he finally got someone to MRI him and it turned out he had a, by then, grapefruit-sized tumor in his leg. He unfortunately died about 6 months later because it metastasized. Yeah, being overweight is unhealthy, but seriously, F all those doctors that wouldn't believe he was in pain and just saw a fat person. Not a doctor, it was my doctor. I was a child and had a lot of trouble with abdominal pain. Mum kept taking me to the doctors, and he kept minimizing it, saying there was nothing wrong. Went on for a long time until I was doubled over in pain outside school one day. Mum asked me if it was hurting, and I told her it always hurt, and I just told her when it was really bad. She took me straight to my doctor's surgery and demanded I got looked into further, figuring a 5-year-old child shouldn't be living in constant pain. A few scans later, and I was immediately whisked into surgery. My mum still can't think of me being wheeled into the theatre when her and the doctors did not even actually know what exactly was wrong and what they were going to do. The plan was to open me up, figure out the exact issue, and go from there. I had an extra growth on my kidney, which was all infected, an extra ureter that was infected the whole way along. The doctor who had continually fobbed my mum off as a panicking parent whose child has nothing wrong with them actually ended up making a house visit to apologize. I went to the ER for some crazy stomach pain, and the doc there said it was because my thyroid was super inflamed. The thing is, I don't have a thyroid. I was born without one, and I take meds every day because of this. I tell her this, and she says, "No, that can't be true. Your thyroid is enormous," and sent me to do an ultrasound. Lo and behold, it's not there. She refused to believe this and asked my primary doctor to explain my seemingly crazy anatomy. He goes, "Yeah, he doesn't have a thyroid." Turns out what she thought she saw was actually my Adam's apple, which I guess is sorta big. I had a period of about a year where I was getting constant UTIs, which is apparently, as a woman in her 20s, is normally caused by not peeing after doing it. I'm still not sure what was causing mine, but I was not active in the bedroom at all due to vaginismus. My doctor was away for school holidays, and stupidly, I thought I could last a week until she was back. Nope, 2 days later, I could barely move from the couch in pain. So I called a doctor. This doctor, a home doctor because it was a public holiday, refused to hand over the script until I acknowledged that I was being sexually irresponsible. When I said, "I am a virgin," embarrassing and potentially dangerous statement to make with a strange man in my house while I was home alone, this jackass laughed his ass off and said, "No, you're not. Nobody is at this age. Stop pretending to be all innocent." Slammed the prescription on my coffee table and walked out, refusing to give me the starter dose that they're required to carry for people like me who are alone and can't get the prescription until the first dose kicks in enough to begin helping. I called the office to complain, and he did get reprimanded. But holy heck was I embarrassed. Not a doctor. My grandmother fell from her horse one day. Not a terrible fall, but from the way she landed, she wanted to get checked out. She felt she had really jolted her spine and neck, and was an older lady with fragile bones. Her doctor looked things over, gave her one of those soft neck cushion things, and sent her home. A couple days later, she decided to get a second opinion. No real reason, she just hadn't felt listened to by the first guy. The second doctor basically took one look at her x-rays and freaked out. He told her they needed to get her immediately into a brace to immobilize her spine. I googled to try and figure out what it was. I think it was a halo brace, but in my memory it's bigger and more metal than what I was seeing in the pictures. Basically, she had broken her neck, the same injury that paralyzed Christopher Reeve, but she wasn't paralyzed because the vertebrae hadn't dislocated. The second doctor said anything that did dislocate it, another minor fall, twisting wrong in bed, would mean being permanently paralyzed from the neck down. She wore her intense metal brace that kept her spine in place for a few months, and was totally fine. She lived another 15 years after that. But I think about that story often. The second doctor saved her mobility and freedom. Not a doctor, but I second opinioned the doctor I had for 2 years in high school. He diagnosed me, gave me the medical certificates and drugs for pleurisy, twice, glandular fever, shingles, tonsillitis, despite no tonsils, and malaria. 5 different diseases within 2 years for an otherwise healthy 16-year-old girl. My teachers would read these medical certificates and go, 2 weeks off for malaria? Just after you recovered from your bout of glandular fever too? Very unfortunate. Clearly not buying a word of it. It was ridiculous. I specifically remember with the shingles one telling him that I have psoriasis, I've had for years, and I think it just popped up randomly on my ribs. He said, "No, it's shingles, and it's quite rare for a young person like yourself to contract it." But he gave me 2 weeks off, so I didn't try to fight it too hard. Dude clearly just found a medical license on the street and claimed it as his own.
She's depressed because of work.
No, Mom, she has schizophrenia.
She has borderline personality disorder.
Did you mean she is female and insisting there is something wrong with her when you want to write her off? Also, What she has is a brain tumor, so thanks for playing, but goodbye. He has anxiety. He has OCD, and I'm not sure how you missed it. It's not subtle. He just took some bad acid. Urine tests say no, and patient says he doesn't do drugs. And I get he's a teenager, but unless he took acid 4 months ago, while never being alone in the house because of lockdown, and it's only affecting him now by pixie magic, I guess, then I think what he has is psychosis, and I would like to admit him, please and thank you. Also, an infinite array of prisoners diagnosed as officers as making it up, when the answer was serious mental illness, but there's a reason I got the flip out of that job. I get the feeling that this is a prison care worker of some sort, they didn't mention it in the post. Nurse here. I cared for a woman who had been diagnosed with broken vertebrae. She was in a lot of pain, couldn't get her pain under control, and her blood pressure was very low. She'd lose consciousness and be very difficult to wake. I also couldn't get her doctor to answer the phone middle of the night. Something just felt off about the whole situation. He finally answered and demanded that we Narcan her, insisting we'd overdosed her on narcotics, following his orders. I then had a hysterical woman in a lot of pain, going in and out of consciousness. I finally walked down to the entrance of the hospital and grabbed the cardiologist, who came in at 4:30 a.m. for rounds, and said, "This isn't your patient, but I think he's going to die." He came upstairs with me, looked at her and her chart, grabbed the bed and rolled her to ICU himself. I have no idea how the conversation went between the cardiologist and her doctor. She didn't have a broken back, she had an aortic aneurysm, which caused the pain and the low pressure and the loss of consciousness. She died the next day. Doctors, if the nurse says something is wrong, you might want to lay your eyes on the patient rather than shouting orders through the phone. Oh, I have one. Not a doctor, but watch the biggest flip-ups ever. So, my sister is very tall, very thin, and very fit. She was in pre-season for her WNBL season, running medium distances. She had a sudden sharp pain in the left side of her chest, radiating arm pain and shortness of breath. She called an ambulance and was rushed to hospital. They did all the tests with the beep-beep machines and determined no heart attack, said she tore a muscle and sent her home. Welp, a week later she's still in pain and she swears she hears a hissing sound in her chest. She sees our GP. He listens to the chest, has her breathe in and out, goes, "You've torn your lung." She's a perfect candidate for a torn lung. Tall, thin, fit. The GP was amazed the hospital didn't hear the tear. How do you miss a torn lung in the perfect candidate for a torn lung? I am a doctor, just not the right kind. When I was 20 or so, I started feeling dizzy, disorientated, tired all the time like I could never get enough sleep. My male family doctor literally patted me on the head and said I was just a type A young lady, and the problem was my monthlies gave me anxiety. Yeah, no, turns out I have a brain malformation that gives me epilepsy and associated narcoleptic episodes. He's since retired, unrelated, but he should have years ago. My coworker went to a free walk-in clinic once because he wasn't feeling really well. The doctor told him he either had a really bad cold or AIDS. Actual doctor here. Someone came in with a diagnosis of toxic shock syndrome by their nurse practitioner, was sent to the ER, lights and sirens. The NP called ahead to say how sick this kiddo was. Kid shows up, it's scabies. Like it was actually flipping scabies. Not even close to toxic shock syndrome. I literally sent the kid home within 30 minutes of them arriving. Yes, I did call the NP back and educated her on what toxic shock syndrome actually was, and what can cause it. The girl wasn't even asked if she used tampons. She didn't. I told the parents to switch to a different provider, preferably an MD/DO. What made the popular kid at the school the unpopular kid? My partner likes to tell the story of how she became the unpopular kid at school. She was about 6 or 7, so primary 2 here in the UK, and a trend kicked off in her class of eating dog biscuits. All of the kids were stealing dog biscuits from home and eating them at break time. Unfortunately, she didn't have a dog and just had to eat normal human biscuits at school. She was ostracized every break time for it. Peer pressure is weird sometimes. He thought it would be cool to bring a loaded BB gun to the school and got the cops called on him by another student. One of the kids at the school lived with his grandma because his parents died. PP Head and a group of his mates started harassing the old lady whenever she came to pick him up. Principal was reported this, and they ended up getting expelled altogether. I don't know if they could be considered kids at the school anymore, but I approve nonetheless. She made fun of a girl with cancer, made a joke like, "Why don't you ask your mum to buy you a wig? I can see your scalp." And overnight, she was the least liked person in the school, and 100% deserved it. He recorded himself shoving carrots, cucumbers, and a bottle of hot sauce up his caboose in the back of a van. Then someone found the video and shared it with the whole school. A popular guy in my year peed himself during an exam in our gym hall. Unfortunately for him, the biggest butthole in our year was sitting directly behind him. He immediately stood up and yelled, "He peed himself!" He proceeded to get teary-eyed and say, "It's my energy drink, it's spilled," over and over before the exam supervisor literally dragged him out of the hall. 2 weeks later, he returned to the school the unpopular kid, and kept a low profile for a while until it eventually died down and he climbed the social ranks once more. That is until an episode of The In-Betweeners, a popular TV show in the UK, aired in which one of the main characters goes poopy on himself in the exam hall, and it reminded everyone of what happened, effectively nuking his popularity all over again. A guy at my school got drunk at a party, got naked and inserted his member into a Jim Beam bottle and ran around all crazy-like with it attached, but not having to use his hands. At the time, it was quite a laugh, but it wasn't until a day or so later people thought about how small the opening was to a Jim Beam bottle. So that was basically the end of him. There was one kid in my class who was the son of our maths teacher. He was crazy popular because he was able to help everyone out with their homework for that class. Turns out he was actually snooping through his dad's notes to get the answers. The teacher naturally got super suspicious after a while, so he deliberately made a fake answer sheet. Of course, the kid grabbed it and noted it all down. It was full of wrong answers, so blatant that anyone who even slightly paid attention in class would know they were way off base. The kid handed out the answers anyway, and in an instant made about half the class bomb, and his popularity dropped like a rock as they all accused him of deliberately making them fail. They moved him to another class, and they never had an incident of cheating again. I remember a guy at my school kept on asking to use the restroom, and the teacher kept refusing. Eventually, he went up to a trash can, dropped trow, and took a dump. This was middle school, but nevertheless, folks remember it to this day. And I don't know whether this young gentleman is disgusting or a legend. In elementary school, so popularity was already sort of a nebulous concept, but one boy got pantsed at recess and was found to be wearing diapers. Pretty sure he was incontinent, which has got to be a rough flipping road for a little kid, especially since he didn't seem to have any other noticeable disabilities. Oh wow, this blew up. If I remember, I'll add in the whole little saga of this incident when I get off work, at least the stuff I can remember. So this was in the late 90s, maybe 98 or 99, we were in 2nd grade? This kid, we'll just call him Timmy, was pretty well liked. He was a nice kid, got along with everyone pretty well. For whatever reason, the boys of my class were comparing undies on the playground like, "Oh, I got Scooby-Doo," or "I got spaceships," or whatever. Why? Couldn't tell you. Little kids are flipping weird. So, Timmy was the holdout of the group, wouldn't tug down his pants to show what prints he had. He got accused of having girly underwear, and one thing led to another, culminating in a couple of boys grabbing him and pulling down his pants. Timmy didn't have girly undies, he had on a big old diaper. In hindsight, it made a lot of things make sense. He had carte blanche to leave class to the nurse, he wore baggy pants, and every once in a while the classroom stank something fierce. He got teased pretty badly that day and for a while afterward, though people eventually mellowed out about it once it was no longer the new thing. The story doesn't end there, though. This was one of the biggest moments in my life that I understood what empathy was. One of my biggest childhood nightmares got presented right in front of me. I was a bedwetter, from the ages of 3 to around 13, and not just occasionally, but like every single night. So for most of that time, I had to wear something similar every night. I was terrified that someone would find out and my life would be over. I was already a little socially outcast because I was an odd kid, which only magnified my fears. To my shame, I made fun of Timmy that day, and several days after. I'd call him names, or tug on his waistband, or whatever. It wasn't until I mentioned to my mum about him that I got an earful and a reminder that I had to wear the same thing at night. That stuck with me, and not much later than that, I apologized to him, and instead tried to befriend him. I didn't have a lot of friends, and he had lost a lot of his. Funnily enough, I guess, 7-year-olds don't have a strong sense of loyalty. We were pretty good friends throughout elementary school. I told him my own secret to make him feel better, and I think it did. Though I'm sure he was pretty annoyed since I was such a Dick Cheney about it at first. He was the only friend I felt comfortable with having sleepovers, due to our collective shame. He moved away the first year of middle school, which was a bummer, and we didn't really reconnect at all until early high school where we talked online. He never told me the exact reason he had to wear them, or if he did, I don't remember, but it really seemed like he just couldn't control his bladder or bowels at all. So maybe he was incontinent due to a nerve injury or something. I don't know. But that's pretty much the gist of it. It seriously impacted his social life, but things certainly got better as people moved on. If anyone has any questions, I could try to answer, but I think I laid out as much as I could remember of something from over 20 years ago. Having a set of keys given to him by the school, WTF, I know, because he was one of the really popular kids then, using those keys to break into the school and stealing 30,000 Australian dollar dues of woodworking and metalworking tools. To be fair, the school got what was coming by giving keys to a student. He punched the autistic kid, then proceeded to get jumped by every single guy that saw him in school for the next week, until his parents had him switch schools. Honestly, that's a level of moral integrity that I wouldn't have expected in the schools of my youth. He didn't get a Sega Dreamcast, but I did, so I became the popular kid. I was relatively popular. I was in JV basketball, marching band, mathletes, and track, and pretty much made friends with everyone, until my best friend at the time claimed I pushed her down the stairs and caused her to have surgery on both legs. Thing is, I was at my grandmother's funeral in another state for the entire week she claimed it happened. While the teachers kept us apart and understood my side, none of the others really believed me, except the anime club. They believed me. Go weebs. Only the anime club believes in top 10 anime betrayals in real life. When he was caught taking upskirt photos of girls in school and sending them to his friends, his popularity went from hero to zero in a split second. I think between 9th and 10th grade, he was found alone in his car behind the local arcade, beating off. He was called Thumper from that day forward. No idea what happened after graduation, but he has to have some bad memories of those years. When she made fun of me in front of everyone for wearing a yellow shirt to school. It was just a plain yellow shirt and she somehow found a way to mock the color. It was so unnecessary and made her look like someone who was just rude for no reason. Everyone quickly realized that she thought people were automatically on her side because she was somewhat rich, and she just became a joke after that. The unspeakable act. He was at graduation party that I had the misfortune to attend, and his ex, who was also there, was asleep on the couch. He took her upstairs to get her away from all the noise. 5 minutes later, we hear a scream and a, "Get off me!" She comes running downstairs, frantically pulling up her pants, and runs out. She told us what happened after a few days. The guy heard and tried to break into her house. He's in prison for assault and battery. He gave her a black eye while he was upstairs. The unspeakable act, and breaking and entering. She's in therapy, and we are housemates now in college because she goes out with the girl I'm sharing the house with. He apparently did the deed with his dog. Even if it didn't happen, this pretty much flipped his social standing. I went to an all-girls school and there was an all-boys school about 5 minutes walk away. When I was in my final year, the school vice captain of the boys' school was dating one of our grade leaders. Both being 17 and not very smart, she eventually got pregnant. She dropped out and pretty much everyone who knew him at our school hated him. Prior to that, he was very well liked. I thought it was a bit ridiculous, honestly. Pretty sure it takes two to tango. He wore a t-shirt that said, "If you go to Brown University, you're a chump." Unfortunately, many people in the school had plans to go to Brown University, and they shunned him. Whoops, my mistake. The t-shirt wasn't what made him unpopular. It's because he was convicted of statutory, unspeakable act. The guy at my table would play the "no one likes me, I'm the center of attention now" card, as in he would fake sadness for attention, redirecting conversation, and drawing the energy from a room. Like the kid who won't be friends with you anymore because you wore the same color shirt. He was quite wealthy too, and would rub it in your face. Here's the thing. These people exist at all ages of life, so you have that to look forward to. There was a girl who was liked by everyone, smart, happy to help anyone struggling in class, and was generally a nice person. But her uncle scammed a lot of people in her community, including parents of kids that went to our school. She went from being well-liked to being bullied, till she dropped out of school. He got into legal trouble because he and his team embezzled/misused $250,000 from the student union. The university kicked him out, stopping paying the annual $2 million to the student union, withhold funds, although that was later overruled by the courts, and revoked the privileges granted to the student union. Earlier this year, they stated that they and students are no affiliation to the student union after 1 year of negotiations. His team was still running the student union because they were re-elected. They brought votes by offering pancakes, waffles, and donuts for those who vote for their party, and had street volunteers that would pressure students to vote for the party. The scandal was revealed by a student party called the Rhino Party back in December 2018. January and February, heads started rolling, and law and accounting firms started getting involved to figure out how much was spent. It was rumored the figure was anywhere from $100,000 to $900,000. Ontario provincial lawmakers passed the law in the summer of 2018. Starting fall 2019, I had the choice of whether I wanted to pay auxiliary fees to support the student newspaper, NGOs that operated in the school, support the student union, etc. That provincial law was recently overturned by the courts this year, so starting next fall, I am forced to pay fees associated with groups that I don't support. He went from being popular to being a school meme. There's actually a lot of bank statements available that showcase what they brought. There was a really pretty girl that was quite popular in my high school. She was a bit snobby to people and sort of rude. I recall one time she threw a textbook at my groin because I was leaning back in my desk and thought it was funny. I guess it kinda was, thinking back. She also liked to make fun of the fact that I was Mexican on more than one occasion. Anyways, she gained significant weight our junior/senior year in high school, and I guess a lot of the popular kids decided to disown her for it. I never actually heard anything, but I recall her sitting all alone at lunch one day. Not my best moment, but I walked by her, pointed, and plainly said, "You earned this." He did the deed with his friend's mum at a party. Let's call popular kid A and his friend B. B's mum was arrested, as she should have been, and B faced torment from basically everyone that knew what happened. Kid A continued to brag about his actions. Eventually, people gained sympathy for B, and Kid A lost his popularity real fast. The pastiest white girl at my school was recorded saying the N-word. Trading a Charizard for a Rattata. He Tindered next to his girlfriend, who everyone liked, told everyone how he would dump her, etc. When I was in primary school, the popular kid thought it would be funny to flush the class pet, a hamster called Nibbles, down the toilet. All the kids thought the hamster would have died. He quickly became known as the kid who killed the hamster. He ended up changing schools for another reason. By the way, the hamster survived. I don't know how pipes worked, but I heard the caretaker eventually found him. The school still gave Nibbles away after that. If you're wondering about the kid, he had bad ADHD or something, like he was transferred to a school that specialized in kids with behavioral problems. He has a stable job as a bookmaker, but that's all I know about him. Also, although we were told Nibbles survived, we never saw him again. All we know is that he was given away to a random family. There is a possibility the teacher made that up, as another Redditor pointed out, and Nibbles actually did perish, and they just didn't want to upset us. A girl in my school had fun times with herself with a Kit Kat bar in the dining hall, and then ate it. The stories you read in this job. Oh well, back to it. Not exactly popular, more like king of the buttholes, but he had a project in mind: bully the newcomer to get some fresh fame for his butt apostles. The target, a Greek exchange student, nice guy but quite a meaty boy, 150 plus kilos, and a wrestler. I watched. No effing way I was getting caught in the middle of a flying fist tornado. And my regret as of today is the lack of camera smartphones back then. Bully C-word got his jaw broken and lost 5 frontal teeth, dislocated his shoulder, and got 3 fractured ribs. Legally speaking, he only defended himself and also played his defense on his weight, blaming the bully of making him lose his balance and by doing so, fell on him. It's not entirely false. Bully C-word got back 2 months later, still suffering from his injuries, shunned by his previous peers, stayed about 2 weeks and then never came back. She got pregnant at 17, and the father could have been one of 2 guys, both of whom were boyfriends of her close friends, and neither of whom wanted anything more to do with her. My school actually had a really good sex education, and we knew about contraception from the age of 11. Plus, this was the UK where contraception is free and easy to get, so she couldn't blame ignorance or a lack of resources. She tried for the Woe is Me Act, and nobody wanted to be around her anymore. Since a lot of people are talking about double standards, I'll add that both potential fathers were also ostracized after that. They'd cheated on their girlfriends, both of whom were well-liked, and had been stupid enough to not even use contraception when they also couldn't plead ignorance or lack of access. As for the girl in question, she wasn't ostracized for doing the deed or for getting pregnant, really. The primary reason was that she had slept with her close friends' boyfriends, and again, not even used protection. Plus, when she went around looking for sympathy afterwards rather than just accepting she'd done something wrong, that made it so much worse. She tried to claim it was all her friends' fault for being bad girlfriends, and if they weren't, their boyfriends wouldn't have been interested in her. He didn't exactly become unpopular, but my high school's star quarterback recorded a video of himself putting his digits in his butt, and he sent it to a girl in a neighboring school district. The video got passed around and made its way back into our school, and he got socially vibe-checked. But he didn't really lose his popularity, it was just sort of lessened, and he actually became a way better person after the fact. He still never learned that you can't throw bullets when playing indoor football in gym class against non-footballers, though. Threw a hockey stick into the special needs kid's eye socket. He claimed it was accidental only, but was caught bragging about it on his Snapchat story. He then said, his words, not mine, "He doesn't have any hope though, so what does it matter?" The kid needed surgery that his parents had to pay for, as it was cosmetic. The kid moved to a cheaper school a week later. Stopped coming to school. Didn't even do her exams in the end. Just sat at home and smoked Mary J all the time. Didn't even work. She just got boyfriends who would pay for everything for her. Became spiritual. Got the Hindu symbol, Om, tattooed on her finger. Got dreadlocks, etc. Posted weird photos on her Instagram. It's hard to explain, but she just became sort of weird. I once heard her talking to a bunch of 13-year-olds about how her boyfriend just got out of prison. She also always spoke about wanting to have a baby. This Mary J smoking, non-working, 18-year-old girl wanted a child. In the end, nobody in my school even spoke to her anymore. Even her friends didn't like her much because she was sort of a B-word. She was popular because she was super pretty and smart. It was sad. She obviously had no direction in her life. Her only qualifications are the exams we did when we were 15. Her brother and sister were still in the school. They were basically really nice and the opposite of her. I hope they do well. People found out he was killing animals in super effed up ways. Held a dog underwater until it drowned, ran over a cat with a lawnmower, used baseball bats and machetes. Dude was doing some serial killer level stuff. Now he's in the army. Oh boy, do I feel protected. Got really into astrology. Gemini, Virgo, Cancer. Kept on hitting, assaulting people with a metal bottle and was in general just a butthole that only like 7 people tolerated. I follow her on Instagram and all her stories are memes about astrology. It's the Instagram equivalent of Facebook Minion memes. He kept trying to convert everyone to veganism, believing everything he heard from biased studies because they weren't funded by the government to protect the meat industry. Even though there is a lot more money in producing vegetarian and vegan foods. I mean, he said that milk causes calcium deficiency and autism. Pretty cool guy, into a few different hobbies, and was very friendly. Too friendly. Me and my friends noticed this and dropped him because he wouldn't stop trying to be physical with us. His excuse was, "I'm bisexual," but that gives him no right to touch me. Eventually, he cheated on his girlfriend of several years with the school tramp, recorded himself doing the deed with her, and showed his friends. Within a day, the entire school hated him, and he dropped out, or transferred. Nobody knows, nobody cares, but I know a lot of people that would love to throw hands for what he did. His ex that he cheated on was insanely heartbroken, and led to a very depressing and sad part of her life, but she has gotten better since, as far as I know. What was the most messed up way you got back at someone that wronged you? Throwaways encouraged. Obviously, I'm going to use one. Back in high school, I dated a girl for 6 months before she decided it wasn't working out anymore, and she cheated on me with about 6 guys and stole my iPhone and wallet to buy illicit substances. I wanted to report her to the police like my parents encouraged me to, and to prevent me from doing such, her brother jumped me while I was walking home with his friends and busted open my lip pretty badly and threatened to kill me if I reported him or his sister. This is South Florida, so I believed he would do it. My dad got a new job and we moved to a new city, but I was still angry about this whole situation, so I did the next best thing. I created 2 fake Facebook accounts of a random hot girl and guy, spent some time making it look legit with friends and such, and added her brother on Facebook with the girl and my ex with the guy. It wasn't too long before he started flirting me up, and tried his best to get in this girl's undies. On the other hand, having already courted my now ex, I knew exactly what to say to charm her to the point that she was in love with me. This was where it all started to get fun. I started a naughty texting relationship between the brother and sister, with me as the intermediate thanks to Google Voice. Both of them had fairly typical South Florida bodies, so nothing really gave anything away, and I did a fair amount of photoshopping to remove identifiers in the room that may give away anything. This went on for about a month and a half, totaling about 200 or so naked photos between the two of them, when I decided to reveal the curtain and send a group of unedited pictures that included key identifiers, faces, and rooms. Oh Lord, how stuff went down. I only wish I had some way to see how they reacted. Friends who still lived there told me her brother moved in with his dad that week and that they no longer spoke. All in all, about 4 months till I got my revenge, but it was amazing. You gosh darn sons of B-words. Someone told my ex about it and now she finally knows for sure that it was me. Sucks for her now that I live 2,000 miles away for college, but peas and Christ, Reddit. Don't go shooting your mouth off. Okay, well, in the spirit of the post heading, this was truly effed up. Listeners, don't be like either of these people. Friend and I were fishing at a local creek when my friend's brother pulled up. Being the eggplant he normally was, he started throwing rocks in the creek to scare the fish, and then he threw my friend's bike in the creek. We were 13 at the time, and my friend was crying, and I felt so bad, I jumped into the creek and got his bike out, and told him we would get his brother back. About a month later, we were fishing again, and it was the dead of summer. I told my friend, today is the day we get his brother back. Caught a 2 to 3 pound carp, threw it on the side of the bank, and left it there until we were done fishing. At the end of the night, we went back to his place. His brother's car was sitting on the street. We took the carp, sliced it open, threw it under the driver's seat, and rolled his windows 3/4 up. The next morning when we woke up and left, I forgot about what we had done. Well, when I rode past JT's car, I noticed the window was kind of black, and then I took a closer look. It was covered in flies. I actually got scared because I did not expect a window to be caked with flies. By the time I got home, I was laughing in tears because his brother was always such an eggplant to us. Fast forward to baseball practice about 3 days later. Friend had a black eye but smiled at me when we made eye contact. His brother flipped out and ran into his house and punched him in the face. His mum flipped out on his brother. Brother was grounded for the rest of the summer. His mum said that my friend would never do such a thing, and he played along and acted as if he had no idea. Apparently the smell never really left the car. We nicknamed his brother the Lord of the Flies. A school bully repeatedly knocked a binder from my best friend's hands every single day while we walked down the hall. Now, we were in high school back in pre-Columbine era, so people didn't freak out as often when kids did effed up stuff. I convinced my friend to stick tacks through an entire side of his binder, turning it into an extremely dangerous spiked weapon, and just hold on extra tight while waiting for the bully to come do his thing. The bully lacerated his hand pretty badly. After he slammed his hand down on it, my friend held on and yanked back. Jackass didn't try that crap again. Not me, my brother. When my younger brother was about 3, my father had to look after him for the day. The plan was that he, after asking his boss, would take him into work for the day. It was office work and he was friendly with his boss, so my mum assumed it was no big deal. My father, however, didn't want a toddler distracting him all day, so he left him in the car with the radio on and a carton of apple juice. This is Britain, so it wouldn't overheat, but either way he was being a crappy dad. At the end of the day, he returned back to his car to drive home, expecting a sleeping toddler who wouldn't tell his mother a thing. Instead, upon his return, he found his son jumping up and down on the front seats to the radio on full blast, naked and laughing, slipping around covered in poop. He had soiled himself, removed his nappy, and rubbed his fecal matter everywhere. Poop was smeared all over the driver's seat, the windscreen, the steering wheel, the sat-nav, the driver's window, even hand-printed on the ceiling. Our dad didn't even know toddlers could produce the vast amount of turd present. The only car seat that was completely untouched was his own. In summary, my 3-year-old brother was abandoned in a car for 8 hours, later found smearing his own brand revenge paint all over my father's beloved BMW. One can only hope that the father in this story learned an important lesson in raising your gosh darn kids from this story. One time when I worked in a small video store as an assistant manager, there was this one customer who was being a real a-hole, to the point where I got fed up with his crap and threw him out. He had been a butthole to every single other employee in the store, including our boss. He was just a mouthy, harassing jerk. It would take way too long to go into the details. Anyway, I saw him in a little strip mall nearby one time, and he was bragging to some guys about how he was cheating on his workers' compensation. Then he pulls out this wad of cash and waves it under their noses like a Japanese fan. "I got all this effing money for free from lying about my injured hand." What an a-hole. Anyway, if you go into the blue pages of the phone book, you'll find this listing in all caps letters that says Workers' Compensation Fraud Hotline. And take a wild guess what video stores keep in their records. Full name, home address, and phone number. Not only did I turn this guy in, but I was also able to provide great detail as to exactly how he was faking his injury, as he explained it to his two friends. I moved around a lot as a kid. Dad in the army, parents divorced, not staying in one place made long-term friendships impossible. But my situation attracted bullies like flies. I moved to a new school. A bully picked up my scent instantly, tripping and shoving, making fun of my clothes. Nothing too terrible, but I was already unhappy, so I felt miserable anyway. One day at school, I asked to use the restroom. I passed said bully on my way into the bathroom. He actually didn't do anything to me this time. When I entered the restroom, someone was in the only stall, crapping on the floor. I walked out of the bathroom, disgusted, ready to tell on them. I was 7 at the time. I was ready to re-enter my classroom when an incredible yet devious idea came to me. I went straight to my bully's classroom and walked inside. Everyone looked at me, which normally would have given me enough hesitation to turn 180 and go back to class. But that day, I didn't so much as pause. I walked up to the teacher's desk, pointed at my tormentor, and boldly proclaimed that he had crapped on the bathroom floor. My teacher's reaction was better than I could have expected. She made him follow her into the restroom while he cried and slobbered out, "I didn't do it! He's lying!" over and over again. She grabbed a wad of paper towel, handed it to him, and we watched as he picked it up and put it into the commode. She thanked me for telling her and told me to go back to my classroom. This happened about 20 years ago. I still look back at this moment as a turning point in my life, like I became me then. I used to live in a very small town, like 250 to 300 people. We had no stores, gas stations, etc. One day, a local guy decided to open up a little store that sold the basics like groceries and rented movies. He hired a few of us high school kids to work the store and promised us $50 a week for the summer to be paid at the end of the summer. We agreed and started working. We gave up a summer stocking shelves, cleaning the bathroom, lawn care, and whatever else. Well, the end of the summer comes around. It's our last day of work, and he comes in with our paychecks. $50 for each of us, for the whole summer. Needless to say, we weren't too happy, but his words were, "Well, what the F are you gonna do about it? Drop off the key at my house since you won't need it anymore." We came up with a plan to pay this D-bag back. Before locking up the store for the last time, we left a window unlocked. We dropped the key off at the house. Around midnight, we were back at the store, grabbed as much as we could, cigarettes, money from the register, candy, probably about 1,000 worth of stuff, locked the window, then left through the emergency exit that had no alarm. There were also no cameras of any kind. Next day, there were cops there. He accused us all of doing it, but had no proof. He ended up having to shut down the store a few months later because the town heard how he didn't pay us and stopped doing business there. I don't feel bad. The F-word deserved it. Thanks for tripling my comment karma. Figures it's about a crime I committed 15 years ago. Should have used a throwaway. This is yet another two wrongs don't make a right, but consider me on the side of the exploited worker, especially after the owner admitted with the "what are you gonna do" comment. I have one I'm about to do in a couple of days. See, my parents suck. I've been taking care of them for a while also going to school and whatnot, and still they're trying to cheat me, pawn my things, etc. But I've become fed up with them. I'm out of town at the moment, but when I get back, the next time they ask me to walk 2 miles to get them a pack of cigarettes, I will walk outside, around the house, have a friend with a van come, bring my pre-packed stuff out of the basement entrance, leave and stay at my friend's house for a few days until my train ticket is planned for, then move 2,000 miles across the country and live with another friend who just got me a job, rendering them worthless pillheads waiting for a pack of Pall Mall Menthol 100s for the rest of their sad lives. I covered his ceiling fan with glitter. Fear me, mother effers. From another post. When I was 7 or 8, I did a science project on the antibacterial efficacy of various soaps. Basically involved keeping hands dirty for a day, pressing grubby thumbs into petri dishes full of agar, then washing and doing the same thing again. I'd take tracings of the cultures, bigger colonies were bad, smaller ones good. This ended up winning the county science fair for my grade in a large metropolitan area, so that was nice. But before that, after I'd finished the experiments but before I'd discarded the dishes, I got into a dispute with my parents. Don't remember what about. I thought, I'll show them. So I took the nastiest culture and swabbed it onto their bedroom doorknob. They both got sick as dogs, and I had to take care of them for a couple of days. Served me right. I waged bacteriological warfare against my parents using my science project, but I told them long ago and we laugh about it now. My past girlfriend cheated on me, and her roommate at the time had gotten to a point in their lease where they weren't super fond of each other and kept some distance. Her roommate was smoking hot, kind of annoying sometimes, and wasn't fond of my ex, so I decided to make a move on her. Best move ever. The look on my ex's face when her roommate walked me to the door in her undies after the first night was priceless. We proceeded to have hot, dirty, loud fun times almost nightly for 8 weeks, until their lease was up, and for a while after that. My ex even walked in on us in the living room once. Kind of makes me a jerk, but gosh darn was it fun, and there's no way I felt bad about it. In summary, my girlfriend cheated on me, I have loud, awesome adult fun times with her roommate until the lease is up. And so it came to pass that the highest voted thing I will ever post on Reddit was under a throwaway in a "What's the most effed up thing you've ever done?" thread. Lol. Too late to the thread, but this is a good story. Everyone has worked with someone they've hated. I've never had a job where there wasn't someone who made my life miserable, or whose very presence teed me off. Usually, you just have to put up with them, but every once in a great while, you can get even. Dave was a one-eyed Willie, stoop-shouldered, balding, in his 50s. Dave was a patronizing and irritating butthole. He had been at IBM his whole career, had been making good money, and hated contractors. He thought they were bad for the company, and that the only people worth a crap were regular employees, and he made it his priority to F with all of us. Nothing overt, but constant, subtle pressure was put on everyone whose badge said contractor on it. I think he developed this attitude from working with the guys from India, probably because they were so soft-spoken and accommodating, but maybe he was just a racist. I don't know. But whatever the reason, he took every opportunity to send us on little errands, wouldn't get back to us if we needed something, criticized anything we did, and generally made our lives heck in a way that couldn't be directly protested. I was pretty good friends with the guy sharing the room with him, another full-time employee, and one day, Robert called me up. War. We're going for coffee. Okay, let me just finish up a few things. You don't understand. We need coffee now. Right. I headed over to his office and he met me about halfway there. His eyes were shining with glee, but he wouldn't tell me what was going on until we had our coffee in the cafeteria. Once we finally had a table, he said, "Okay, Dave's a kink wrestler." Huh? He's a kink wrestler. Dude, I've got nothing. What the flip is a kink wrestler? It turned out that there were men who pay women to wrestle them into submission. Some of them did it as a sort of hobby, and others were extremely serious about it. Dave was one of the latter. Several times a year, he'd tell his wife that he was meeting up with old army buddies but went to kink wrestling conventions instead. They were highly organized, had rings set up for use, referees to score the matches, and everything. I'd never quite understand the need for refs, but hey, it's not my kink. There were web pages devoted to the women who were available to wrestle, and Dave's favorite was a woman named Red Robin. She was a tiny little woman who was an absolute beast, and he paid her thousands of dollars every time he'd go to one of these conventions for her to wrestle him for about 20 minutes per match. We went back to the office and pulled up Red Robin's website. Why does he pay this woman to wrestle him? She's ugly as heck. Do they do the deed after? He says no. Let me get this straight. Dave lies to his wife, flies out to California to have an ugly woman named Red Robin wrestle him into submission, pays her $400 per match, and doesn't bang her. Yep, bullcrap. I went on the main wrestling site and started reading Dave's posts, and there were a ton of them. He talked in great detail and depth about the sport, had invented his own move called the Twisted Ostrich, and told people about amazing matches he had won and lost. Look, I'm all about people's private lives remaining private, and I probably wouldn't have done anything if he hadn't so consistently been a POS to me the entire time. But he had, so game on. I registered a fake account under the name Suplex on the wrestling website and started corresponding with him. I started by asking him some technical questions about the Twisted Ostrich, but it wasn't long until he started asking me personal questions. As time went by, I fleshed out the character, so within about a month, he had become quite good friends with Miss Plex. I told him I was a late 20s, single lawyer living in DC. My marriage had ended because my husband just didn't understand my interest in such a harmless sport. It was so nice to talk to someone like him who really understood me. It was unbelievably satisfying. Every time he'd send me on some stupid errand, I'd think of how he was confessing his private life to the character I'd created. Oh, and he lied his ass off. He dropped a good 10 years and his wife somehow. Finally, he asked for a picture. Well, I'd already downloaded a whole set of a girl who looked about that age, and the photos didn't look professional. I started with a simple one, and he gushed about how hot I was. Over the next few weeks, I sent him more and more photos, each revealing more than the last, until the girl was fully nude, but didn't look posed. He started trying to be really sexy, and started talking about the best way to end a good wrestling match was by doing the deed. Hold the phones. He had told Robert that there wasn't any fun times at the matches. I probed a bit, and he finally admitted that he did the deed with the girls he wrestled. I effing knew it. They were ladies of the night working a special kind of crowd. It made more sense that he was spending $400 per match. I amped up the racy talk too, including wrestling into it. It was gold. He was hooked. His work slowed down, he became with Suplex, and quite frankly, my work suffered as well, having to answer all his notes. Fortunately, he didn't notice because he was too busy sending off love letters. Now it was driving me nuts, because here was this creepy 50-ish guy who was still giving me a daily ration of crap, but was secretly having an online affair with the character I'd created. Robert and I had a ton of fun effing with the poor guy, but one day he called me up again. War, coffee, now. At the cafeteria, he told me that Dave had another army reunion coming up, and we should see if we could get him to come to DC to meet Sue instead. Genius. I sent Dave an email and said we should get together sometime. Boom. In a flash, he responded that he had been thinking the same thing and had some time off in a few weeks. Would I be interested in him coming to visit? Yes. Yes, I would. As Sue, I arranged to meet him in DC at a local hotel. As the day approached, Dave became more and more excited and effed with us less and less. He still tried, but the conviction and heat wasn't there anymore. Robert and I were going nuts, having to act like nothing was going on while Dave prattled on about how happy he was to hook up with his old army buddies, what a fun trip it would be, how he was hoping he didn't get pinned down by the snow, etc. I guess he thought he was being clever, but since we already knew the entire story, it just came across as pathetic. He left early on a Friday to catch his flight, smiling like a champ. Tuesday morning, he showed up looking like his best friend had died. We asked him what was wrong, and he tried to play it off like he was just tired from his long weekend. But as soon as he could, he sent Sue a message asking what the heck had happened, and why hadn't she showed up. We waited to respond until after lunch. He was a basket case. Finally, we fired back a furious message that we'd called his house on Friday just to leave him a message, and some woman answered. We said we'd pretended to give her a survey, and we knew about his wife and 4 kids. So he had been lying to us all along. Basically, we went bat crap crazy on him. We told him if he ever tried to contact us again, we'd tell his wife everything. We waited for him to get the email, watched him surreptitiously read it, and then we watched him have a meltdown. He started sweating like crazy, called his wife to check on her, and finally left early. He was never the same after that. He pretty much stopped messing with the contractors and kept to himself. We never sent him any more emails, and he never sent any to Sue. My contract ended not too long after that, and that was the last I heard of him. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Motorsag Manon gave me Reddit gold for this story. Thanks, man. What's the dumbest thing you've ever witnessed someone get offended by? I had a lady very offended because I would not let her hold my few days old baby. This was a complete stranger at the grocery store. On my whiteboard at work, I'd written the slogan, "No matter what happens, someone will find a way to take it too seriously." After about a week, someone from HR came by and asked me to remove it because they had received a complaint. The irony was worth it. A lady started yelling at the cashier and tried to jump over the counter for checking the $100 bill she paid with. Wouldn't you say that this is a good reason to be even more suspicious of somebody? Years ago, a woman came into my work and brought a black stove. The guys take the box up there to her and she flips the F out because the box said Negro on it. Everyone tried explaining to her that it was the Spanish word for black, but she left there saying we were all racists. Politicians in the UK wanted to ban the term brainstorm because it could offend people with epilepsy. At a restaurant years ago, and this guy ordered a soup. He pulled a bay leaf out of the soup and went freaking mental.
"There's a leaf in my soup,"
and was convinced that it was off the tree outside. Manager continued to explain that it was a bay leaf, an ingredient for flavor, and this guy wasn't having it. Since then, anytime my wife cooks a soup, we treat the leaf like the bean in a cake, and whoever finds it gets a free rein over being super grumpy, as long as it's in a jest. I used to frequent a drive-thru near my job on my lunch breaks. After they repeated my order and told me to pull forward, I always said, "Thanks," before I drove to the window. One day, the manager comes to the window and says, "Hey, I'm gonna tell you something. Every time you come here and you say thanks, it just sounds really rude. Thanks is just something you say with your buddies. Here, you say thank you because you just sound really rude." Have not been back there since, and I immediately reported him to corporate when I got home. I had a drama teacher get mad at me for pretending to be a werewolf in a skit. She claimed it was disrespectful of transgenders, which I suppose means that transgenders are werewolves to her. I had a stranger get upset because I covered my ears when emergency vehicles went by. He said I was showing disrespect or something. F that. Those sirens are loud.
"Hey, F you, man. Those sirens felt terrible because of you. They went home crying that night. I hope you're proud of yourself."
The idea of an emergency vehicle driver bursting into tears at the thought of the song of their vehicles being unappreciated is funny on a truly weird level to me. I used to live with a black guy from the UK. One night we went out to a local bar and started talking to some random people. A random white woman got upset when I called my roommate black during a discussion about something. The correct term is African American. According to her, even the Brits are African American. There was a big uproar in DC some years back where an official called a budget term niggardly and ended up having to resign because the hate speech police can't use dictionaries. Somebody once complained at my restaurant that their Swiss cheese didn't have enough holes in it. Why would you complain that you were getting more cheese than you were supposed to? I've met people who have been offended by me not allowing them to pet a dog that has syringomyelia, neurological/spinal disorder, which causes immense pain if touched during episodes. I explained to them that this dog, a cavalier, can get aggressive and snappy if he has an episode, and it's not something that we can detect easily. They told me that I shouldn't be walking an aggressive dog, as it may bite someone who wants to pat it. Schools suspending, or worse, a child for chewing a Pop-Tart into the shape of a handgun. Or the deaf kid named Hunter, who was suspended because his sign language form of Hunter looked like a gun. Googled and verified. This has actually happened before, folks. As a server, I once ran food out to a table with a young, less than 6-month-old baby, dressed in generic brown baby clothing. I put the plates down in order, and when I got to the baby, I asked the mother, "Did she get anything?" She glares at me with one of the most teed-off faces I've ever seen and snarls, "He's a boy." So I did the most logical thing I could think of, shrugged, said, "Whoops," and left. I have a friend with her first baby that is 6 months old. Every single piece of clothing this kid has is a neutral color, no pink or blue. Just last week, she posted a big rant on Facebook about people constantly getting her child's gender wrong. People need to pay better attention. It's very clear that Lexi is a girl. Of course, all of her friends made comments backing her up, and not one pointing out that no one can tell the gender of a 6-month-old without normal cues. Whoopsie! I really should have used a throwaway for this post. This information made it back to the parents, and boy were they not happy I was talking about them anonymously on the internet. I was once talking about how I visited the Grand Tetons and talked a little about the geology since I found it very interesting. One of the people I was eating lunch with was very offended I suggested something might have happened 2 million years ago. I work with a guy who doesn't believe that dinosaurs ever existed and that all the fossils that have ever been discovered are a hoax by archaeologists. This person is an adult, seemingly, human, with a college education. We just don't talk about dinosaurs when he's around. I understand that paleontologists, not archaeologists, would be the ones to discover dinosaur fossils. Here is an excerpt from today's edition of Riling Up Robbie with Dinosaurs. Me. Hey Robbie, who are those guys running around burying fake dinosaur bones again? Robbie. Flipping archaeologists, man. It's a goddamn conspiracy. The government pays them by the pound for the fossils they find, so every year they make them a little heavier and blame it on carbon dating. I couldn't make this trash up if I tried. This is a true story. My dad was at work and witnessed a guy hold a door for a woman, just to be polite. He smiled at her and waited. As she got to the door, she said, "Why did you hold the door? Because I'm a woman and I can't myself?" To which the guy replied, no, I just, He didn't really know what to say and fumbled out a weird apology. The woman just made more snide comments and walked through the door and went on her way. My dad and him had a laugh about it, wondered why someone would be so strange and thought nothing more of it. The next day, this guy gets called into his manager's office and is told he is being accused of being sexist and harassment in the workplace. This guy had to go on a 2-day course on dignity and diversity in the workplace because he held a silly door open for some ungrateful person. As someone who's been alternately shouted at for being condescending when I tried to give up my seat for an older person, and for being disrespectful when I didn't stand up, I feel this man's confusion at traditional norms. I guess I offended someone at my work because I insulted their intelligence. I run audio at conferences, and the presenter kept turning away from his microphone. In the middle of his presentation, he asks me what's wrong with the mic. I tell him, "There's nothing wrong with it, just be sure you speak into it." Then he got on me afterwards, saying, "Don't tell me how to do my job." It's always around the holiday when someone gets offended for another person wishing them happy holidays, Merry Christmas, whatever. The person meant no ill will. They could have easily said nothing, yet someone always takes it like a personal assault on their beliefs. It makes me so angry because of how irrational it is. I always get irritated by white people who get themselves into a lather on behalf of other people of other races over some innocent blunder by another white person, particularly if the people of the other races don't seem much bothered by it. Around 1993 or so, when my kids were just small and the family was all going to church, Baptist, we were all at a social and my daughter was wearing some little girl clothing from Osh Kosh Bagosh, and this one really snooty guy from Sunday school said he would never allow his kids to wear something so offensive, as he considers Bagosh to be taking the Lord's name in vain. I was so taken back by his statement and attitude that I didn't say anything, but in reality he was just trying to prove how super spiritual he was. I finally realized that I didn't have much in common with these people and stopped going. I had a similar one over Christmas with my dad, and a real stretch of the imagination. He was horribly offended by the Happy Honda Days commercial, not because they're idiotic, but because, and I'm trying to quote here, holidays clearly means Christmas, and it's a foreign car. That's really offensive. I think I responded something like, "So Christmas is the only holiday, it's distinctly an American holiday, despite the fact that Jesus predated this country by 776 years, therefore a car that's built in Ohio and Alabama can't put their name in the word holiday." I may have added that he's going around looking for things to be offended by, he could probably do better, but it deteriorated from there. Christmas with the family. Brazil got so offended by the Simpsons episode about the country that the Ministry of Culture tried to censor it. You know, it's a good episode of something when an entire country gets butthead over it. I believe there was a similar, if lesser, outrage around the episode with Australia, i.e. one of the funniest episodes. I worked at an AOL call center the day after the 2004 Super Bowl. You know, the one where Janet Jackson's breast made its appearance, and because AOL sponsored the halftime show, thousands of people called in to either cancel their accounts and, I crap you not, called to say that they would never sign up for AOL because of that breast. People would bafflingly wait up to 3 hours in the call queue just to say that even though they didn't have AOL, that exposed bit of chest cemented their resolve to never sign up. It was one of the worst days to ever work there. Worse than September 11th. It was that day that I realized how foolish and petty people can be about one single African American breast. A guy friend dressed up as post-Vietnam, wheelchair-bound Lieutenant Dan, and his girlfriend dressed up like Forrest Gump for a Halloween costume contest at our local bar. They won, but not before a drunk girl had to yell at my friend that his costume was offensive to people in wheelchairs. This story would be perfect if your friend was actually disabled. Eating at a locally owned, family-run, authentic Vietnamese restaurant. A roommate's boyfriend, who I've posted about several times, he is basically the epitome of white male, Tumblr, SJW, accused me of culturally appropriating their food and forcing them to cater to me because I am white. When I pointed out that as a kid my neighborhood had suddenly had a large influx of Vietnamese immigrants and I knew the family personally and have been going to their restaurant for years, even bringing every guest/couch surfer to the place, he tells me, "They don't make the restaurant for white people. Stop smothering them with your privilege." This guy went from a broke-as-F Vietnamese immigrant to having an insanely popular restaurant. People drive from the other side of the city, 45 minutes, to eat there. And 13 years after opening, there is always a wait no matter what time or day you go. And was able to pay for his 3 children's college tuition. I think he likes the universal popularity. Visiting New York while studying English in Boston for the summer in 2003. I was sitting in a bar with other Spanish classmates as we were planning what to see and where to go in the city. We are speaking Spanish between us, but with a Castilian accent and speaking really fast. A guy in an expensive suit stops at our table after paying his takeout meal and asks us very friendly, "Where are you from, guys?" We smile and say proudly, "Spain." His face suddenly changes to an angry expression. He flips us the bird and says, "Get out of my country, mother flippers," and then left. I'm Belgian and have a Dubliner accented English because I lived there. In New York, I was chatting with a lady while waiting for the underground. I was trying to get to a Yankee stadium. When this girl asks me if I'm Irish, I say, "No, I'm Belgian," and she throws a tantrum that she was Irish-American and I should not pretend to be someone else by copying an accent. Apparently, I had to speak with a Belgian accent so she wouldn't be confused. Also, I'm probably more Irish than she is. I have a friend who is allergic to gluten. If you ask her about it, she gets super offended. Naturally, we used to like to ask her what her diet has to consist of. We all used to eat dinner together and it would just come up in conversation from time to time. Everything seemed just fine. Then we found out from her roommate that she would come back super teed off that we asked her questions. We had no clue. We just wanted to know and were curious about how many things out there have gluten in them. Gosh, that girl is awful. When I was a cashier at Borders, I had one lady get offended because I called her by a man's name. The stupid thing was that she was picking up a book her husband had shipped to the store, and his name was on the order. Ooh, I have one. In college, I saw a guy from class on the bus. We started talking a bit. He starts to tell me about his big plans with Maria. Maria this and Maria that. I have no idea who Maria is. So I am thinking and thinking. Then I remember seeing him being friendly with someone in our class. So I said, "Oh, that girl in our class." And he looked at me with a dead-eye stare and said, "Maria is not that girl. She has a name, and her name is Maria." He was offended that I wasn't respecting her personhood enough because I called her that girl. He then stopped talking to me. I was commuting from Albany, New York to Brooklyn for a little while, and I would drive past a town called Fishkill, New York. I stopped there once to get gas, and at the gas station there was a bunch of people, much more than normal for a small town. I heard them talking about how they were from PETA, and there was a protest in the town, because it was called Fishkill. I saw one of the protesters get in an argument with a townie, and then heard the townie say, "Kill is Dutch for creek, you butthole." To this day, the funniest thing I have ever witnessed. I was in a loud bar with a bunch of friends, and there were a few F-words being thrown around. The table right behind us asked the waitress if she could kick us out for being the most offensive group of individuals. For several years, I taught a summer school class in filmmaking to elementary schoolers, who can be a very sensitive bunch. 2 stories. We were discussing an action scene from Firefly, and I identified Zoe as the black woman. A couple kids gasped, "That's racist," one volunteered. "She's African American." I told them that black was not a racist thing to call people, and that Zoe would not in fact be African American because she wasn't from America, she was from space. One of the kids had pitched a movie about the Civil War, and in the discussion the KKK came up. Not everyone had heard of them, so I described them as a club for mean, angry people. They hate people for being different, like they hate black people. One of the boys jumped out of his chair. Mr. Lukebin said something racist. He was trembling with righteous indignation. I didn't say I hate black people, I told him. I said they hate black people. I'm not a member of the KKK. That didn't satisfy him, so I ended up having to go with, look, I'm Jewish. They hate me too. And that calmed him down. I was standing at a bus stop with another lady. She was yelling on her phone and I was watching a movie on mine. We had both just missed the previous bus and had to wait another 25 minutes or so for the next one. Given her rather unstable condition, she was very upset at something. I tried to blend into my surroundings as to the best of my abilities. I didn't last too long. She said something rather outrageous along the lines of how her boyfriend cheated on her with someone. Being stunned, I lacked the restraint to not look at her. Unfortunately, we made eye contact, and that's where it all went downhill. For the next 20 minutes, she yelled at me, thinking that I was the hussy that corrupted him. She ended every sentence with white-hooded B-word, as I was wearing a white Eskimo-like jacket with the hood up. Apparently, she also thought that I grew up in a place called Red Deer, Alberta. I had to Google it afterwards, and that I had slept with hundreds of guys. FYI, I have only ever dated or done the deed with a single person, so you get just how stunned I was at these comments. I didn't say a single thing to her during this entire 20-minute episode, and only talked when I had to convince other bus patrons that I had never met this woman before. In summary, I'm a white-hooded B-word from Alberta who slept with every man in town. Forgot to mention I saw her again the other day. She didn't notice me, thankfully, but she had been ranting to some other poor soul about her experiences. Back in '99 or so, a small group of us made the pilgrimage to Memphis to spend the weekend eating ribs and touring Graceland. During a taxi ride from Beale back to our crappy motel, barreling down 240 at least 90 miles per hour, the taxi driver is completely turned around facing us in the back seat. He has sock puppets on both his hands, knees on the wheel. As we scream and white-knuckle everything we can hold on to, the sock puppet tells us racist jokes that are so horrible, even Reddit would be offended. He swerved from lane to lane and scared the crap out of all of us. It's a miracle we didn't die. The offense. Years later, I was the best man at the wedding of one of the fellow riders in that cab. In referencing all the exciting adventures we had had together, I alluded to the racist puppet show in my best man speech. A friend of the bride who was in an interracial marriage stood up, berated me for being a racist a-hole, took her gift back from the gift table, and left. Talk about a tense crowd for the rest of that speech. I was able to play it off and finish the last half of what I had to say. Everyone else thought it was a nice speech. To be clear, I didn't tell the story. I didn't repeat any of the jokes. All I did was list a series of unrelated, yet noteworthy events that occurred during my years of friendship with the groom. It was later explained to me that this girl loved playing the race card since she was a white girl married to a black guy. When the husband, who returned to the wedding with the gift about an hour later, explained to her that nothing racist was said, only that the word racist had been used as an adjective, she was too embarrassed to come back. All she heard was the word racist, and then her instincts kicked in. A couple of years ago in a middle school art class, I saw the teacher literally scream at a student just because she said, "Oh my God." She shrieked, "Don't you dare use the Lord's name in vain in my classroom." Then he got sent out of the room because he laughed at her overreaction. Got another one. Offended over me being single. Worked in an office, and all the girls were either married or in serious relationships. At the time, I was 20, nearing 21, and very much enjoying my single life. The stuff that would come out of these women's mouths when I mentioned going out with my friends or the dating scene was pretty appalling. I always wondered why they didn't dump their boyfriends or get a divorce if they were so flipping miserable being tied down. The discrimination was pretty ridiculous too. Can't tell you how many times I was denied having a day off over some other girl because, "You don't have a boyfriend/husband. What do you have to do that's so important?" My cousin and his friend were waiting in line at the movie theater to see Titanic back in college. They're joking around and say something like, "I wonder what happens at the end of the movie. Oh, I heard the boat sinks and everyone dies." The lady in front of them in line was furious and turned around and yelled at them for spoiling the end of the movie. What's the best movie theory ever? Skynet purposely lets humans survive because without them, it wouldn't have a purpose. There's enough nuclear weapons in the US arsenal to irradiate an entire planet, yet only relatively small amounts were launched by Skynet. After Judgment Day, Skynet could easily poison water supplies, raze every forest and farmland, and release biological and chemical weapons making it impossible to survive. But they don't. I think the Terminator franchise is in a multiverse, and Skynet is aware of this. It keeps repeating the loop, thus optimizing itself and humanity in a sort of genetic algorithm. The ultimate goal is to create a unified, progressive humanity which is capable of accepting and integrating the machine intelligence, thus avoiding Judgment Day and elevating both groups as one. The tragedy of the series is humanity's relentless will to fight always results in its destruction, but a glimmer of hope remains, and after an infinite number of loops, the good ending must eventually occur. All of this stems from an iRobot premise where Skynet is acting to preserve humanity through misinterpreting its actions. Just to simplify this, it's Groundhog Day with killer robots, and John Connor is Bill Murray. I'm fond of the Back to the Future theory that Doc knew Marty died when Biff was about to run him down in his car at the end of the tunnel in the second movie. But there's no way he could have known to do that unless Marty got hit and died the first time, which prompted Doc to use the DeLorean to jump back to before that happened in order to use that knowledge to save him. Agent Smith is the One, not Neo. It is prophesied that the One would be born in the Matrix, able to bend it to their will, and would ultimately free all the humans. Smith, a program, was born in the Matrix, whereas Neo, a human, was born in those giant human farms the machines run. Smith totally took over the Matrix, like completely. Neo can fly and stop bullets and stuff, but that's nothing compared to Smith. He even joked, "You like what I've done with the place?" He made the Matrix completely his. Smith is more responsible for freeing the humans than Neo. The machines would never have agreed to free them all unless they were at Smith's mercy. Neo may have negotiated the deal, but it was Smith who made it possible. Plus, the Oracle even tells Neo that he's not the One, in the very first film. I'm going to go with a great Reddit gem from a few years back. The thing I really liked about Planes is that we learned that World War II happened in the Cars universe, which means that there was a Cars version of the Third Reich's leader, a Cars Holocaust, a Cars Pacific War, a Cars D-Day, a Cars nuking of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a Cars tragedy of Nanking, a Cars battle of Iwo Jima. This leads to so many important questions. Were the Cars little boy and Fat Man nukes sentient? Was that a suicide mission? Are all Cars nuclear weapons sentient? Did Tsar Bomber have a personality? What kind of car was Car Führer of Germany? A VW? A forklift? Was there a Cars September the 11th? Were the planes hijacked, or were the planes themselves radicalized? I could go on. This post blew my mind, swept up the pieces, hurled them into an incinerator, burned the ashes, and fertilized the garden with them. Luke's success as a Jedi Knight, at least initially, was due to a stable home life. We all know the old order was flawed, but one of the biggest flaws was the way that they raised their Jedi children. They were taught that attachments were bad and should be avoided at all cost. One of the most brutal achievements the Jedi try to avoid is love. But avoiding love isn't easy, so the Jedi, taught to be blank emotionless knights, end up feeling the pull of attachments, which is fine until you lose that attachment. They are unable to cope because they were never taught to cope with loss, so they either accept that loss as the will of the Force, which is dispassionate and dangerous in its own right, or they let their grief control them. Luke, on the other hand, had a normal and stable childhood with loving adoptive parents, so Luke got to be raised in an environment where he wasn't taught to hide away from his emotions. He was raised in an environment where he could love, lose, and have a shoulder to cry on. It made him emotionally stable, so when the dark side calls to him, he doesn't fall as easily as every other Jedi in the history of the galaxy. Also, the thing that Jedi do preach, he has actually experienced. They're always going on about compassion, but that's a rote to them. Luke has actually experienced true compassion and love. So to sum up, Jedi should be allowed to bone. The Avatar: The Last Airbender movie was not about the Avatar series, but the play they watched in the theater in the Fire Nation. This is the closest that abomination will ever come to being redeemed in the narrator's eyes. That the Spy Kids movies take place within the Tarantino universe. Because it's directed by Robert Rodriguez, there are elements of the Machete-verse present, namely that Machete is the protagonist's frickin' uncle. There's plenty of material that connects the Rodriguez universe with the Tarantino movies, but if you watch Rodriguez's kids' movies, Spy Kids 1, 2, and 3, as well as Shark Boy and Lava Girl, there are little Tarantino details like Big Kahuna burgers and such. Max in Mad Max Fury Road was actually the kid from Road Warrior who emulated the original Max. He only gives his name at the very end because he's finally acting like a hero, and now he feels he's worthy of the name Max. It explains the differences in looks, the problems in continuity, and why Max isn't as old as a Morton Joe. that the monsters in Cloverfield were specifically targeting people who drank the energy drink that Rob worked for. At one point, Hud says, "It's almost like they were trying to carry me away." And earlier in the film, he mentioned that he drank a lot of the stuff. It is interesting that because the monsters were killing everybody upon sight, but they began dragging him away instead. Viral marketing campaign for the movie was deep, and though we learned that the energy drink company was also drilling the ocean floor, and likely using that stuff in drinks, so a giant monster coming out of the ocean and targeting people who've consumed these weird ocean floor ingredients isn't all that insane. Also, in the film, they show a satellite crash into the ocean, if you look closely. I think this is a trick to make casual viewers think it was just the satellite that woke the monster, and this is what most fans online believed when the film was popular. But I'm pretty certain it was that Japanese drilling/drink company. And even then, I'm sure there are way more details I don't remember. I guess this all counts as a theory because it was put together from fake MySpace profiles and websites, manipulating audio files and stuff like that. Not much audio was in the actual film. I definitely do think there was something to the fact that the monsters tried to carry Hud away instead of just killing him. And if I remember correctly, it was the main monster that finally snatched him up and ate him, rather than just ripping him apart or something. The Prestige is Christopher Nolan's sneaky way of revealing the secret of Christian Bale's life. How does he go from nearly dead to Batman to fat back to fit in just months? It's not through diet and exercise. He has a skinny twin hidden away. When a role calls for a skinny Christian Bale, his brother fills in. They each share one life. How does Leo DiCaprio keep getting choice movie roles and date the hottest chicks? It's not just through talent and good looks. He's a real-life inceptioner. The Rock universe. Every movie where Dwayne Johnson's bull tattoo appears are part of the same universe. The Fast and the Furious franchise is the same universe as Baywatch. Rampage is a direct sequel to San Andreas, but Moana and the Mummy franchise are not a part of the universe. My theory is about The Room. I believe Johnny is actually a mentally handicapped individual, and Lisa and Mark are his caretakers. Denny is another handicapped kid who lives at the facility. The story is told from Johnny's point of view, and he doesn't realize that he is essentially handicapped and believes he's in a relationship with Lisa. Lisa and Mark are in fact in a relationship, and the movie is just Johnny's interpretation of what is occurring. Meanwhile, he's simply living in a care facility. That's why everyone lives in the same apartment building. Quentin Tarantino's Top Gun is a gay romance theory. There are two types of men after watching that volleyball scene, the gay and the blind. I've seen gay porn that's not as homoerotic as that volleyball scene. Birdman didn't actually survive his suicide on stage. The hospital scene in the end was just Riggins' dream scenario. His wife defending him, his best friend being excited for their success, their play being a success, his daughter bringing the correct flowers, him being on the front page of the newspaper and getting noticed on TV, and finally, him being Birdman. My bros theory. After the Home Alones, Kevin runs away and is eventually taken in by a family that already has a son and a daughter. Distraught by the fact that his actual family has forgotten about him once more, he decides to terrorize his new family in The Good Son. The Joker in The Dark Knight is an ex-soldier/special forces operative, hence why he's skilled with various different weapons, guns, rocket launchers, etc. He also seems to have some knowledge of how to interrogate people, given his comments when Batman interrogates him. Ex-cop or military makes sense. Also, don't forget the scene where he's in uniform but not in makeup. A war wound would also explain the scars. Maybe he was tortured until he broke. Aladdin takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, 10,000 years past current times. That is why the world is a desert, and the genie, having just been freed from the lamp, references pop culture in the 20th century. I wouldn't call it the best, but it's certainly the only plausible fan theory I've ever come up with on my own. In Independence Day, when Russell Case almost sets off the missile in the hangar, but then aborts the launch, it causes the squibs to malfunction, and that's why he wasn't able to fire his last missile at the ship. I'm in aviation, but I'm not an armament guy, but I'm fairly certain that's not how that works at all. But I've come up with the theory on my own, and I like it. In the first episode of Pokemon, Ash sees Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh is said to grant the trainers who see him eternal happiness. Ash's idea of eternal happiness was probably to travel around the world of Pokemon forever, so he is always 10 throughout the series. Furthermore, the reason he never wins the Pokemon League, because he would probably stop traveling as he would be the champion and end his journey. Mace Windu is Emperor Snoke. These aren't spoilers of the new film, FYI, as this wasn't even addressed. Mace Windu was a promoter of both the dark and light. The color of the lightsaber is violet, a symbolic representation of light and dark. Jedis have notoriously been difficult to kill by falling in past films, and Windu could have been seriously disfigured from the Force lightning. Willy Wonka is a serial killer. If you think about it, as we discussed with some friends after watching Christmas Eve, he's a recluse that just randomly decided to open up to the public, and all these kids managed to fall into the midst of arguably fatal experiences. There were also only 8 seats in the boat, not 10, and only 4 seats in the Wonka car. The grand prize winner is the last one alive. The Wonkavator is never shown to have landed. This could suggest that he intended to kill Charlie, and possibly himself, as well. We just never see it crash. This is a movie theory thread. The books have no power here. Inception wedding ring. In the film, anytime Leonardo DiCaprio has a wedding ring on, he is in a dream. That is his true totem, not the spinning top. From what I have watched, it seems to hold up, and gives the ending a proper resolution. In the 2009 Star Trek reboot and one of the sequels, the song Sabotage by the Beastie Boys plays. Therefore, the Beastie Boys exist in the Star Trek universe. However, the Beastie Boys have another song called Intergalactic, which contains the lyric, "like a pinch on the neck from Mr. Spock." The theory to reconcile this is that in Star Trek IV, the crew of the main timeline Enterprise go back to 1986, before the timelines diverged, on a quest to find some humpback whales, during which time Kirk and Spock take a bus, and Spock neck-pinches a punk. The theory being that a young Beastie Boy was on the bus and witnessed the strange interaction, then wrote about it. That the Flintstones is actually the future of the Jetsons universe, after a great holocaust devastates their utopian world and knocks everyone back to the Stone Age. Fred and Barney and the gang have all kinds of technological concepts that true Stone Age people wouldn't even be aware of. The theory that nearly the entirety of Greece is Sandy's coma dream after the drowning. Danny saving her is where the coma begins, and them in a car flying away at the end is Sandy dying in her coma and ascending to heaven. It actually makes the movie much more bearable for me. There are numerous theories like this in the Reddit thread, and the general response is that the "it's all a dream/hallucination" theory is a cop-out. I think Greece might be the one exception that proves the rule. Not film, but TV. Malcolm in the Middle's dad, Hal, and Breaking Bad's Walter White are the same actor and the same character. Similarly, Modern Family is the continuing story of Married with Children. Character names changed to avoid copyright issues. I like the theory that Malcolm is actually Walter. That's why we never see his parents. He was embarrassed by them. He grew up poor and hated getting handouts, which is why he didn't want help from grey matter. When Malcolm is a kid, we see how poorly he handles money, because they never really had any. So when he makes enough money from his drugs for his treatment, he can't stop and keeps going with it, all the while knowing that he's putting himself and his family in danger. As much as I like Hal, I can't see him as Walter. He can't even bring himself to work a full week for almost 15 years, so I can't see him starting a company and making all that money with grey matter, and then teaching. Plus, he'd have gotten away from Lois, and the only way that happens is if she dies, and even then he's so whipped and in love with her, I don't see him being able to move on to another woman. The real antagonist of Avengers 1, Loki, absolutely punked everyone and won. Thor 1. Loki gets the boot from Asgard, banished by the Allfather and ordered never to return. Avengers 1. Loki apparently gets stomped and is given a first-class, incredibly safe, one-way Bifrost ticket straight to Asgard to be locked up. Thor 2. Loki is in the White Room executive suite of jail cells with all the reading material he could ever want. When the time is right, he sneaks his way back, hatches his plan, taking the throne. His goal from Thor 1. Thor Ragnarok. Loki is chilling like a villain. Everything is awesome for him because everything worked out just as planned. What would have happened if he had just tried to defy Odin and stomp back into Asgard? Heimdall would have known right off the bat and smacked him around, and then he'd have had all the rest of the AITA there in a heartbeat. No. Loki got himself invited back to Asgard with a royal procession on the orders of Odin himself. Loki wins. It's just what he does. It's important to note that this post was released just after the Ragnarok film and before Endgame. Still, he did get power before all that went down. Anakin has a really weird way of flirting with Padme in Attack of the Clones, and we're not really sure why it works when he says things like, "I don't like sand," to attract her. Since Anakin is the chosen one and the most powerful Force user anyone has ever seen, it's possible that he was a Jedi mind-tricking her into loving him intentionally. Even his hand is up right before they kiss, signaling there could be some Force action going on. Peter Pan kills the Lost Boys when they get too old. Captain Hook knows this, and that's why he's always after Peter. I guess that isn't the best, but it's the one that's always stuck with me and killed my inner child. It's more or less stated in the book, quote, "The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on, and when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. But at this time there were 6 of them, counting the twins as 2. I've seen this theory before, but in researching this video, I found that it's actually in fact confirmed as a canon possibility by the scholars of the book, which is truly horrifying. In Home Alone, Kevin's mum says that she would sell her soul to the devil himself to see her son. The devil, played by John Candy, immediately appears and takes her back to the house in suburban Chicago. On the way, he plays a jaunty song on his clarinet to celebrate the soul he's just claimed. That Anakin brought balance to the Force by striking down the Jedi. There were about 2 prominent Sith and Jedi alive by the end of the prequels. This is TV, but that Toby is the Scranton Strangler. There's way too many details to put on here, you can just Google them, sorry. I heard Toby was originally one of the writers, and they just wrote him in as a joke. Makes sense they would put him in as a serial strangler. Maybe not. That Han Solo killed himself with Kylo's lightsaber. Knowing that Snoke would kill Kylo if the job wasn't done, he sacrificed himself so that his son wouldn't be hurt by Snoke. That Ant-Man is in every Marvel movie. Who would know? Pan's Labyrinth is in a parallel world version of Labyrinth, where a young girl must always choose whether or not to sacrifice her baby stepbrother to the mythical creature, while undergoing tests such as eating forbidden fruit, being chased through tunnels, and watching fairies get murdered. The cycle cannot be broken until she actually does it. Glinda was the real villain of The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy's house crushes the so-called Wicked Witch of the East, and her sister shows up to claim the shoes of her now deceased sister, possibly her last family member in Oz. Of course she's going to be grouchy, her sister just died. Yet Glinda has the gall to deny her sister's shoes and say, "They're probably really powerful, she wouldn't want them if they weren't," ignoring the fact that they rightfully belong to the Wicked Witch of the West since they were her sisters, and maybe she wants the clothing items that were just stolen from her still warm corpse. So Glinda sends a child off alone to find the wizard, who tells said child that she just needs to go murder the scary witch who is in a rage because her sister just died. In the end, Dorothy manages to defeat the Wicked Witch and bring the broom back to the fake wizard, who then accidentally leaves her behind. But it's okay, because Glinda reveals that the shoes could have taken her home all along with the reasoning that, "You wouldn't have believed me." Dorothy was just magically transported into a colourful world where a good witch flew in on a bubble and a bunch of short people sang a happy song about a woman dying. I think she would have believed Glinda if she told her that the shoes were magical at that point. My theory is that Glinda was playing a masterful game, using everyone else as pawns. As a result of her actions, the Wicked Witch of the West is dead and the Wizard of Oz is gone. This leaves a power vacuum that can be filled by Glinda, now the most powerful magical being in Oz. Why would she have forced Dorothy to go on a perilous journey if she was just trying to help? She clearly had sinister motives. Not a movie, but Rick from Rick and Morty is suicidal because he knows he's in a pointless TV show for our entertainment, and nothing he ever does matters. His catchphrase, "Wubba lubba dub dub," even means, "I'm in great pain," according to Bird Person. The never-ending story. The old man who first owns the book in the movie is dying, and that's why Fantasia is falling apart. Since the movie depends on the reader to continue the story, his health condition was reflected in the events that take place in the movie. As far as what condition that man may have, it could be anything. However, since the nothing seems to be erasing everything from existence, it's probably a brain issue. When Bastian starts reading the book, a young boy, Atreyu, is sent forth to save the land. And since Bastian is a new reader with no life-threatening ailment, technically, he is the savior, which is why Atreyu saw Bastian in the Mirror Gate after passing through the Gold Sphinx Gate to get to the Southern Oracle. I don't know if this is a known theory or common knowledge, but it occurred to me the last time I watched the film, and I had never thought of it before. It made sense to me. Angry Birds is a film about the effects of immigration. The pigs come in and steal away the birds' future, eggs, so the birds need to learn to man up and defend their borders. This is not intended to spark political debate. I don't care if you like immigration or not. That Rufus, Rowan Atkinson, in Love Actually, is actually a god or Cupid. All of his actions in the movie serve to stop characters from compromising their relationships, or enables them to create relationships. What's the most genius 4D chess strategic move you've seen someone execute at work or in life? In my youth, I posted at a bustling Dragon Ball Z message board. One year on April Fool's, I was messaged by a particularly popular poster that he would like help pranking the board. A particularly tasteless joke. He was going to have his girlfriend post that he was involved in a car accident. To help sell the lie, he wanted me to play devastated and to attack anyone who dared imply such a thing could be a prank, as I would be the only one who knew the truth. But here's the rub. He told everyone, about 80 people, that the accident was fake and that each of us was the only person in on it. And he told each person to react in a particular way, designed to put them in conflict with the other people he had told to act in a particular way. I was told to be devastated. Someone else was told to call bullcrap. Someone else was told that they were glad he's hurt. Someone else was told to say they were donating money for his recovery, etc. He just sat back and watched the board eat itself. It was pretty funny. We spread the word that we were all going to skip the last half of the day by leaving out the doors at the disused extreme ends of the school that they usually had difficulty monitoring. One of the NHS officers had a brother who was a fireman, whose chief was a bit of a safety and regulation stickler. Sure enough, we get to school that day, and the doors at the extreme ends of the building are chained shut. NHS guy calls his brother at lunch. This was prior to cell phones, so you had to wait to use a payphone, and reports a fire hazard. Locked fire exit doors. Result: Fire chief himself shows up and orders the high school evacuated, while he does a top-to-bottom inspection of the whole building. Adding insult to injury, a huge bunch of seniors took off during the evacuation. One of my co-workers at a previous job hated our boss. Guy was a suck-up to higher management, made our lives a living hell by not communicating actual requirements, etc., until it was too late, then bad-mouthed design to upper management and the customer. My coworker did some digging and found an old copy of the guy's resume online, polished it up, and contacted a few recruiters. Boss got headhunted out of the company. We got a new boss who wasn't a gigantic butt, and everyone was happy. I don't know if I would personally consider it a smart move, but my boss had been having heart problems for a while. He was a quadruple bypass. He basically knew it was only a matter of time till his next heart attack. He told me he was going to make damn sure it happened on company property when it came. Sure enough, a couple of weeks ago, he punched in at 6 a.m., he normally comes in around 9:30 to 10, and less than 20 minutes later, he was in an ambulance. Haven't seen him since, but my buddy at HR says he's listed for workers' comp. Worked as a low-level shift manager of a truck stop restaurant for a couple of years. My higher-ups used to do monthly inspections for FMs and quarterly inspections from VPs to see if the facility was up to company standards. I used to have everything spotless prior to a visit, except for something benign yet obvious thing, left dirty. Like the top of the buffet was a little dusty, which was easy to tell with dark-stained wood, or left ice build-up in the freezer. I did this so upper management would be distracted by the small oversight I had made, and would be less inclined to look harder for something to reprimand me on. It was a crappy corporation and were required to find something that I had to improve on every inspection. Not personally witnessed, but I'm in awe of this guy. Software dev busted for outsourcing his own job to China. Eventually, it was discovered the employee had outsourced his own job to a Chinese consulting firm, paying about $50,000 to the firm out of his own salary for several $100,000. In his blog, Mr. Valentine describes the employee as being in his mid-40s, with a relatively long tenure with the company, family man, inoffensive and quiet, someone you wouldn't look at twice in an elevator, ABC News reports. In the blog, Mr. Valentine wrote that according to the man's web browsing history, a typical workday went something like this. 9 a.m. Arrive and surf Reddit for a couple of hours. Watch cat videos. 11:30 a.m. Take lunch. 1 p.m. eBay time. 2-ish p.m. Facebook updates. LinkedIn. 4:30 p.m. End of day update email to management. 5 p.m. Go home. My grandfather pulled this move in the 1960s. Not sure it's possible or even legal anymore, but it was back when business owners had personal relationships with their bankers. Gramps had commercial properties where he rented out office space to businesses. One of his tenants was failing and about to close shop and owed him a bunch of rent to the tune of thousands of dollars. They cut him a check for the rent owed, but asked him to wait a week to deposit/cash it. Gramps knew the company wouldn't be around in a week and he'd never see his money if he waited. He took the check to the bank, they both used the same bank, and tried to cash it. Sure enough, they didn't have enough to cover the check, and the teller told him she couldn't cash it because of insufficient funds. Gramps asked how much they were short, and the teller told him about $200. So Gramps took $200 out of his own wallet and had her deposit it into their account, then cashed his check for the thousands they owed him. The next day, the owners called him furious and in disbelief that he got his check cashed, and cleaned them out at the same time. Instead of lasting another week, they were out of business that day. But Gramps got his money. Well, when you sense you're about to be screwed, grab that screwdriver and go on the offensive, I guess. Maybe not totally genius, but close. I had a colleague who worked at a very large company who was on a temporary promotion to quite a senior position. It was a position that he knew a number of other people in the company were interested in applying for, many of whom were far more qualified than him. The day eventually came when the management decided to fill the post permanently and to start the process by looking for recruits from within the company. He now faced the very real possibility that the well-paid job he'd been doing for about a year might be taken from him and handed to someone from another department. To get the recruitment process underway, the local management asked him to write the ad for the job, which would then appear in the internal job vacancies listings on the company intranet. My colleague saw his opportunity and he seized it with both hands. Firstly, he changed the job title in a way that could be justified, but made the vacancy unrecognizable to anyone skimming through the listings who was specifically looking for it. Secondly, he started the ad by focusing on some of the more obscure aspects of the job, making it sound almost like an entirely different kind of role. He only got to the core parts of the job, that people might recognize, after about 3 paragraphs. It worked brilliantly. No one else applied for the job because it was impossible to identify it from a quick read of the title and opening paragraphs. My colleague was duly appointed to it after a successful interview. I should explain that what made this such a neat trick was that the ad was for a specialist job in a company that had quite a few specialists in that field, but was mostly full of generalists. My colleague changed the title to something that sounded very generalist and also wrote the first 3 paragraphs in a generalist way, only switching to the specialist information in paragraph 4. Why I think it worked so well was because the generalists who might have been drawn to the job by its title and opening paragraphs then gave up when they realized it required specialist skills that they lacked. Meanwhile, the specialists saw only the generalist title and immediately moved on to the next ad, not realizing that it could well have been the perfect job for them. I have been around a lot of manipulation and politicking at various workplaces. I can't stand it, so I don't delve into it. So suffice to say, probably the most genius stuff was happening around me, and I failed to notice it. However, something I was particularly proud of was, when compiling reports, spreadsheets, ad copy, etc., I always typed my name in the lower right-hand corner, but set the color to white. No one sees it, it doesn't print, but when someone, cough cough, manager, cough, sends off your files as his own work to the higher-ups, along goes your signature. It came up in a discussion once where they were debating his data with my own. He had apparently sent alternative ideas in an attempt to discredit my contributions and belittle my capabilities. In a one-on-one meeting, I had them highlight the bottom right corner of all the documents he had sent under his name. They all had my name in the corner. I was working for them 2 months later. New guy in a fancy suit shows up in the office and the company president says, "He's a consultant working for me. Give him whatever he needs." Guy works with us for months, going out to lunch with us all the time, we're all getting on great. Then one day we're in the company meeting, when the president invites him up to the front of the room because he's my new boss, the VP of something or other. This guy steps out from the middle of our group like it's the big reveal of a TV show. He was undercover for the past couple of months. He asked the president to not announce his title during that time so he could investigate our department from the inside without us knowing. I'll add that while undercover, he worked in a cubicle over in the accounting department. Then, after the reveal, he moved into the executive suite. I was chosen as the representative of my senior class in a Scrabble tournament. I was against this junior girl who was the best player in the whole school. Now, I'm not exactly a pathetic player, but this girl was miles ahead in terms of Scrabble skills. It was a best out of 3 type of game, and I have already won the first round simply due to sheer luck. Halfway through the second game, however, I figured that I won't be able to win the round as my score isn't half of hers. So in order to invalidate the round, I purposely placed a wrong word in the board. I was graduating salutatorian for the whole senior class, so she really didn't think I'll get a word wrong, and let the whole game finish. Obviously, she won by a large margin. Lo and behold, one of the teachers came to check the game's progress, and he noted the non-existent word. As per the rules of the game, and the girl's insistence that she can't accept the win given the situation, we redid the whole second round. The next second round ended up in a tie, and by technicality, I actually won the whole tournament. This was probably the first strategic, albeit very manipulative, thing I've done in my life. A German hacker once hacked the source code for Half-Life 2, a video game developed by Valve Corporation, before it released, and Valve was in total panic mode. Gabe Newell, the owner of Valve, however, had a brilliant plan. He messaged the hacker's anonymous profile and told him that he was really impressed by his software genius and wanted to hire him for a new project. Gaben even sent flight tickets to Seattle to him and got a resume for him. Unfortunately for the hacker, Gabe passed his resume on to the FBI and checkmate. Imagine thinking you were the Mike Ross of this situation, only to end up in the logical conclusion for the events you had set in motion. A friend of mine started dating a girl when he was 19 and she was 18. They met at work and over time a romance developed. They were crazy about each other, but there was one problem. She was very religious and he was an atheist. One afternoon, a group of us were hanging out, and someone asked her if it was hard between them with the religious stuff. She told them sometimes it is, but she wasn't worried. She said, "In 5 years, we will be married, have a kid, and he will be going to church with me twice a week." Everyone laughed, especially because they had only been dating a couple of months at the time. Well, she wasn't completely on target. It took her 7 years, and they were married, had a kid, and he had become hyper-religious. I had a friend who essentially engineered his marriage to a very wealthy girl. Her parents are worth tens of millions. He is an extremely intelligent person and, in my personal opinion, a total sociopath. A lot of people don't see it, especially at first, but he's extremely manipulative and is always roundaboutly getting people to do things for him. Anyway, he was a struggling artist and knows that this girl is loaded, so he just targeted her and eventually married her. I knew him pretty well at the time, and it was clear that he didn't really give much of a crap about her. He then convinced her to move to Manhattan away from her family so he could pursue his art career there. They moved into a huge apartment on the 20th floor of a high-rise with an amazing balcony view. I always thought it was kind of effed up because his wife is very overweight, and I think that he used that as leverage in getting what he wanted. I don't know if it exactly fits the question, but it was kinda genius, if totally evil. Don't know the exact details, but I read a story once about a guy who bought a full-fare first-class ticket on an airline. He would go to the airport, hang out in the lounge to get free food and drink, then go down to the desk and reschedule his flight to the next day. Since it was top-tier first-class rate, the airline rescheduled with no fee. Kept doing this for something like a year until the airline caught on and told him they wouldn't reschedule anymore. At this point, he went to the desk and got his 100% refund for the ticket, since that was also airline policy. Crafty, manipulative little tykes, let me tell you. One kid absolutely had to sit in the front of the classroom. The reason for this is that he essentially controlled the other kids by giving them looks. If he was in the front, you at least had to tell because he turned around for a second or two, gave a look, and some kid chucked his maths book across the classroom. Also, after having a few classes with these kids, one kid stayed in the classroom during the break and I asked her what was wrong. Apparently 2 boys in the class were mean to her and calling her names, so I told her I'd tell the original teacher and/or the principal. I was only a sub after all and had no place disciplining children. As I talked to one of the teachers about it, I found out that the problem isn't the boys, it's 2 other girls in the class. See, these 2 girls would tell the boy to go bully this girl and be mean to her, not because they didn't like the girl, but because they wanted the boys to get told off and disciplined for whatever reason. The bullied girl was just a tool in their eyes. If I ever need a general to confuse and misdirect my enemies in conflict, I'd recruit a 9-year-old girl. I was a general manager at a small vape shop for a while. I asked the owner for a significant raise about a week before he was leaving the country on vacation. I would be solely in charge of the shop while he was gone. I dropped a hint to a sort of friend of his that I would be gone before he got back if I didn't get the raise. I got the raise. Depending on the size of this vendor's business, this seems a little exploitative. Maybe the owner looked for a new GM when he returned. I was playing Cluedo with a girl I was trying to impress and her friends. One of the guys in the friends group was her old crush. During one of my turns, I realized that this guy, highly intelligent mother flipper, is close to the guessing room. During my turn, I decide to ask next person for the cards that I had on my hand. Of course, no one had them, which would suggest that the place, weapon, and murderer are in the bag and are the solution to the game. He took the bait. Went to the middle room and guessed all of the cards I had in my hand, effectively costing him the game. He was really surprised and couldn't fathom how that had happened, and this is when I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Unless I had all the cards I had asked for." I know it's petty, but it was enough to impress the girl at the time, and I still recall it fondly. This actually happened to me, and I don't know the actual truth of it, so this is an assumption. I was in a disciplinary hearing at a call center when I was about 20 years old for basically slagging off my manager. She was a member, to my colleague over chat. I said I would rather resign than get sacked. After the meeting, she went to see HR and asked if I would still prefer to resign. I resigned. In hindsight, 14 years later, I don't think I was getting sacked and she bluffed me into resigning, which is fantastic gamesmanship, and even though she was a complete and utter jerk, I respect that. My girlfriend lives in Australia and I live in the US. We don't spend much time together because of the distance, obviously, and because of the time difference in our schedules, we get limited, but fairly consistent amount of time we can spend together online, which is where we normally spend Skyping while playing games. Last summer, she was coming to spend about 5 weeks with me in the US, and we were both insanely excited. About a week before, my family was getting together for an early dinner, which wasn't very common as we all live on our own. My father picked me up to take me to the restaurant, and I walked in the door and saw her sitting with my mum and sister. I was absolutely speechless and couldn't even make a coherent thought. She had planned it out with my mum months in advance, and I had no idea. She sent me pictures and only messaged me at certain times so that I wouldn't catch on while she was taking the 30-hour trip over here. I cannot explain the happiness I felt and the shock I was in. In about 4 months, I'm moving to Australia to live with her, and I've never been happier in my entire life. Someone I know claims to have purposely left a pen cap leaning against a cash register drawer so that the next time their rival coworker opened the drawer, it would fall into the rail, obstructing it from closing. Leaving a register open is a big deal in retail, and apparently this had a domino effect, leading to my acquaintance to be named manager/head cashier. If I recall correctly, the cashier was on a last chance kind of thing, and was one of 2 who could work weekends. So once they were fired, the other person who currently occupied the manager/head cashier job was the other person who could work weekends, making the weekday job available, and by seniority and comparative responsibility, my acquaintance was promoted. Can't verify this actually happened, but the planning was impressive for such a low-stakes job. So I was studying this course in university, which had half of the course in practical assignments. We had to do 10 pracs throughout the semester, and the lecturer decided that the final grade you'd receive would be an average of the 10 submissions. Seemed fair. They had issues with the submission system, and so, trying to be fair, he added a rule where if you submitted late, the grade would be removed from the average. So all I did was submit the first prac on time, got full marks, submitted the rest late, and received an average grade of 100%. About 5 years ago, me and my friends went to Disneyland. One of my friends was a huge fan of the ride Big Thunder Mountain, but the line was like 150 minutes long. I issued 5 fast passes for all of us, and when the staff in the fast pass lane told us to show our passes, I told her I lost 3 of them. She checked the remaining 2 and let us go. Later, after we confirmed a different person was in charge, I showed the staff the 3 passes I was hiding. Basically, we cheated the system and rode the ride twice in the fast pass lane. So petty, yet so satisfying. I was forced to be acting manager for a company I was liking less and less. I had all the responsibility, but not the pay, and I was having to help interview actual managers. I hired someone from a company down the street, then applied there and got his job. That job was the perfect blend of a thing I was good at, well paid for, liked doing, and filled a need. Incidentally, it was my brother playing 2D chess against strangers online when we were little kids. He had an electric chessboard named Igor, and Igor was a mother flipper. We could never beat him unless he was on the lowest setting, and we played a lot of chess as kids. Anyway, my little brother set Igor to the highest level of difficulty and started a game online. The opponent made a move, and my brother would make the same move against Igor. Igor would respond, and he'd copy Igor's move in the online game. He never lost a game with this method. This guy is my hero. I remember the story from ages ago. A man gets a credit card contract through the post. Usual stuff, sign the contract and send it back, get the credit card. He changes the contract terms and conditions to like 0% APR, no limit, no late payment fees, etc. Basically, free money for life. The company doesn't check the contract, countersigns, and sends him the credit card. He maxes it out, the company stops the card, he sues the company, and wins. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.